The endless forward march of progress in modern gaming, well, sometimes, as well as the sheer volume of games coming out these days, makes it kinda hard to look back, especially when rose-tinted glasses can be so fragile. But not when it comes to all of these games, which, even as the decades go by, seem to age beautifully. Oh dear, has he overslept again? More like Eep Man.
Rise and shine, Mr. Freeman. Rise and shine.
Everyone remembers where they were the first time they played Half-Life 2. I'll let your mind drift for a minute as you travel back to a simpler time. Do you remember Crazy Bones? I loved me some Crazy Bones. Half-Life 2 is ultimately one of those games where you could boot it up in 2005, 2015, 2025, or probably even 2035 if we get there, and still be impressed by what Valve cooked up over 2 decades ago. Now don't get me wrong, the OG Half-Life is still no slouch and has comfortably outlasted a lot of its peers, but the technical leap between it and this second game used to be the stuff you'd sell hardware on. Just from a sheer technical perspective, Half-Life 2 still feels a tad miraculous. The environmental interactivity, the amount of physics going on at one time, the fact that no 10-minute stretch of gameplay is ever the same, the world being absolutely full of lore and Easter eggs, even a lot of today's games struggle to match this. Chuck in some still great animations, those sound effects that will always hit all the monkiest of spots in my monkey brain. Oh yeah, that's a good one. A pretty brave narrative and some fantastic lighting, and it's almost easy to understand how Valve could get stage fright over not making a full sequel to this for so long. It's one of the best games ever made and would still make an impact if released today. Yes, you may want to add a couple of quality of life mods, but if you're discovering Gordon's wacky Fortnite and its excellent episodes for the very first time, do go in vanilla and let yourself be shocked by just how long it took everyone else to catch up to this. As things go, it's not a bad game at all to build your empire on.
Airlove.
There are plenty of genres that have benefited from the rise of 3D, HD, 4K ray traced chin hairs over the last 20 years. Open world games have become like a fetch quest version of Google Earth, while FPS games have allowed you to dress up as Skeletor as you commit war crimes in stunning fidelity. But one genre where all of that fidelity isn't a necessity is the RTS, and Age of Empires 2 proves just that. One of the greatest video game magic tricks of all time, as 10 hours of your life can disappear like the Illusionist when The Prestige came out. Age of Empires 2 is a wonderfully simple game on the surface. You get stuff, you build stuff with that stuff, you amass armies, and then you batter your enemies with your armies. It's a simple gameplay loop, but one that gets its hooks into you pretty much immediately. What gets you so locked in particular is that things will advance as, well, the world advances. Each new age brings with it a bunch of new systems, buildings, and challenges, so no millennium is ever the same as you try to wipe your enemies off the face of the map, but in like a fun way, obviously, not in like a brutal dictator kind of way. There's a lot more to Age of Empires 2 overall than I am really able to cover here, but compared to its successors, this is a wonderfully lean RTS that gets the formula pretty much spot on. Huge yet compact, approachable but deep enough to lose yourself in, it's basically the perfect RTS. If you want any more proof of just how ageless Age of Empires 2 is, the concurrent player count for its definitive edition on Steam is much higher than that of the much more modern 4th game. Even in 2025, give this game a chance and you will get plenty back to the tune of dozens of hours, if not hundreds, as you deal with everything it throws at you, including sheep, dogs, and wolves. Probably the least well-known game of today, arguably not helped by the slightly crap name of Sheep Raider in America, Sheepdog and Wolf remains one of the most overlooked platformers on the OG PlayStation. But first, let me get ahead of the allegations early. You might think I'm taking the easy way out here by choosing a cel-shaded game, which tend to age beautifully by default. Just look at Wind Waker. However, I'm simply going to say Drake of the 99 Dragons and leave it at that. While Sheepdog and Wolf is one of the best lookers on the original PlayStation with some rather lovely animations to boot, it's not just the visuals that make it worth a gander through whichever portal of the World Wide Web to shared video games you want to use. Matey, first of all, this isn't just a simple platformer where you jump over chasms as Ralph Wolf, that's the wolf bit, and indiscriminately scoop up sheep, that's the sheep bit. No, this is more of a puzzle platformer playground with loads and loads of different scenarios as you try to sneak past Sam's sheepdog, that's the dog bit, and gather loads of sheep as part of a game show. You'll be racing with Roadrunner, flying around in a rocket, taking part in rhythm sections, and even dressing up as a sheep across the game's varied levels. It is kind of wild to see how intricate this game is in terms of design, and it almost feels a generation early in some places. Infogrames Lyon really didn't need to swing for the fences here, but we're sure glad they did. Yes, the camera can be annoying, and obviously the frame rate isn't perfect, but Sheepdog and Wolf deserves way better than to be stranded on the PS1. Well, officially. Wait. You might be thinking, right, that Death Stranding is a bit too new to be on here. First of all, it's actually 6 years old, and time and cartilage is just a concept these days, but even if it is probably still a bit too young compared to the rest of the games in the video, it's aged well due to its messaging and themes. Listen, you don't need me to tell you that these are some very divided times we live in, and I'd rather not wade into all that. You probably get enough of it elsewhere. The only political opinion you will ever get from me is that tomato ketchup is a crap sauce because it actively ruins every flavour it infects with its sugared tomato slime. It's just mayonnaise for Luddites. Fundamentally, Death Stranding is a game all about making connections. Everyone is so far apart these days in one way or another, so Sam Porter Bridges travelling across America to bring everyone closer together after a catastrophic event while Conan O'Brien gives him jobs feels kinda timeless. I played it early in 2025 after really not getting along with it originally, and I don't know if I've changed and I'm just able to appreciate it a lot more, or it's that all of the law-breaking Monster Energy stuff was patched out in the director's cut, but I was just able to get along with the game far more than I did in 2019. The fact that Kojima seemed to predict the dark time in the following year is also another almost unbelievable bit of time travel. It also shows just how pivotal Amazon workers are. Remember to give your regular delivery man committed eye contact and a firm nod the next time they deliver your hand cream and Yu-Gi-Oh cards. They do super important work. The combat does still suck in Death Stranding though. Can't knocks it for trying, I guess. Here's another modern-ish game that might raise an eyebrow or two in lieu of some long-forgotten PS2 RPG. The fact that Project Zomboid isn't even out of early access yet might be reason enough for some to exclude it. However, considering how the game began compared to what it is now, this is a true ugly duckling game that will ruin your life. First released as an alpha tech demo way back in 2011, with its earlier versions being hosted on a long-forgotten storefront called Desura? Zomboid was pitched as the ultimate in post-apocalyptic escapism for everyone who tuts at every bad decision in a zombie movie. Yeah, let me just stand right next to this window, dumbass chartered accountant. The development history of Zomboid is impossible to cover in just this section, but through break-ins, payment issues, and all sorts of other bother, developers the Indie Stone have managed to somewhat regularly-ish dole out updates to completely transform the game over time. From giant graphical overhauls to vehicles to new locations to multiplayer to farming to raccoons, Zomboid just keeps on growing and evolving, and there's so many mods for it that sometimes you don't even need to wait for an update. What's most crazy about all this in an era of live service is that there isn't a single microtransaction here. You could have bought this game in 2013 when it launched in early access for a few quid and had countless updates for 10 years without having to buy a Skeletor skin to keep them going. Zomboid is also remarkably cheap for a game of this size and potential, as you can easily get 100 hours out of it without even seeing half of the map. It will have NPCs just before the sun finally overheats and cooks us all, but this, along with games like Dwarf Fortress, are why you sometimes just gotta let developers cook. You know what, I actually wanted to make a Project Zomboid specific channel for quite a while. So I did. It's there, Zombird. Go give it a watch, I walked across the whole map, it's pretty fun, we all had a great time. So let's travel back in time now and take a look at some of our other beautifully aged games on specific consoles. Don't worry, I've got a whole system. You might not be too familiar with it, but Vice Project Doom is an NES game that's aged extremely well, which will become obvious across the vibrant levels you'll be driving and fighting in, including locations such as Chinatown and a biotech lab. While many NES games struggled with multiple gameplay formats in a single cartridge, you go to hell, Bayou Billy, Vice Project Doom nailed the mix pretty nicely. An action game in which you play a Vice Squad detective investigating an addictive gel. Vice Project Doom featured the expected side-scrolling platform action, but also included driving and rail shooter stages. All of these levels are fun, control great across each unique setting, and give the whole experience a sense of grandeur and scope you won't always find with other action NES games. And it's not just the gameplay that keeps Vice Project Doom in the range of decades-old NES games that still have a lot to offer. Graphically, the game looked great for its time, and it does today too, with varied and distinctive sprites against lovely backdrops throughout the different types of stages. You'll also find Project Doom to be brutally difficult in that nostalgic NES way that reminds you that yes, you are in great pain, but you are alive, and yet the game rarely feels unfair. Difficult to put down, but kinda difficult to pick up for cheap, Vice Project Doom also has some truly underrated level design from long-forgotten developer Icom. Contra offered a perfect run-and-gun experience in arcades and on the NES in 1988, and the frenetic joy of that experience is alive and well decades later. Contra arms you with a cache of rapid-fire weaponry and a basic plot, slightly changed for Western audiences, involving an alien invasion and Marines who, for legal reasons, technically aren't Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone, in the same way that Solid Snake technically isn't Michael Biehn. Konami and copyright law in the 1980s? No. Even with several superior sequels among its ranks, as well as stuff like some mediocre PS1 efforts and completely forgotten games that released this year, the first Contra still gets a significant amount of affection from old and new players alike. The insanity begins by throwing you into a gunfight that quickly turns into something far more fantastical than a simple combat mission. Juggling different playing perspectives, including a stylized pseudo 3D effect that has you moving and shooting towards the background, Contra never gets boring. It's a tough game even for today, with a reputation for being a little bit bullshit hard that hasn't changed very much today, but it's an immensely satisfying kind of bullshit hard, and hey, you've always got the Konami code to give you a little edge if you need it, as a little treat. Contra remains a classic that should be at the top of your to playlist if you're new to the world of the NES. Longtime fans can pick up the game anytime and have the same blast they did in 1988. Question time. Which Contra game came with 3D glasses? Drop your answer down below and you could win a free Steam key for free. Despite a title that becomes less fun to say as time goes on because it reminds me of some kind of weird bird fax machine Pokemon, Faxanadu is ageless and unfortunately relatively obscure. This RPG slash side-scrolling hybrid doesn't have quite as much marquee value as some of the other games we're covering here, and that's a damn shame. You are the hero who must aid the king and save the elven kingdom of Aeolis from ruin. It's a nice basic story and it's suitably nicely told, but where Faxanadu becomes an enduring must-play in the modern world is in its presentation. With surprisingly sharp, distinctive visuals and backgrounds evoking a highly unusual H.R. Geiger vibe for a fantasy setting, Faxanadu goes deep into building the details of its world through the varied people you meet along the way. Even as the game has very hard limits to its depth, there's an immersive world here that can catch you by surprise, combined with one of the most underrated soundtracks in perhaps the entire NES library. While a bit grindy at times, and first timers the game will want to beware the notoriously annoying password system, Faxanadu demands careful strategy and timing, and never really lets you catch your breath as you bring orders to the kingdom and sell the first copy of your book.
Mr. Vice President, someone finally bought a copy of your book, sir.
Well, this calls for a celebration.
If we have to choose only one Mega Man game across a run of 6 platformers ranging from very good to phenomenal, we're going with one of the best video game sequels of all time. But honestly, feel free to put basically any other NES Mega Man game here instead. Mega Man 2 took the core gameplay of the initial installment and refined it with more interesting robot henchmen, including Heatman, Quickman, and Crashman. These improvements extend to the stage designs, with each boss getting a level built around their details. Airman has you fighting in the clouds. Woodman has you barreling through lush greenery surrounded by various killer robots. The improvements even extend to the very, admittedly, bare-bones plot, which nevertheless creates genuine stakes in Mega Man's battle with the fiendish Dr. Wily. This might shock you to hear, but Mega Man 2 is a tough video game to beat even today, but it's arguably the most measured in difficulty across the first 6 games. The kinda slight slipperiness of the platforming is a bit of a problem, but is considerably better than the first title. Capcom was seriously hitting their stride for creativity, challenge, and proving the NES could play games with kick-ass soundtracks that were also as bright and colourful as they were infuriating in the most difficult spots. Mega Man 2 isn't just a timeless Mega Man adventure, it's a portrait of a developer that was quickly standing out from almost anyone else on the NES. Clean sprites, smooth backgrounds, and excellent top-down RPG mechanics all conspire to make Crystalis one of the best aged NES games we're going to go over today. Set in a world that feels quite vast for Nintendo's first Western console, with a fast-paced approach to combat that will have you consistently developing and reworking your strategies for enemies who will absolutely rock your shit if you come at them underleveled, Crystalis is another underappreciated action RPG on the NES. Crystalis also ages well for an ambitious for its time story. You're a young magician awakening from cryogenic sleep in the years-long aftermath of nuclear war. As you set about solving the mystery of your very identity, you learn that you may also be the one thing that can redeem the world from the ashes of disaster. That's a pretty wild plot for 1990, and Crystalis further sets itself apart from its contemporaries by giving you a varied world to travel and explore, with lots of monsters and some excellent creature designs for the era. It's a perfect choice for those looking for something else along the lines of the original Legend of Zelda without an old man guilting you out of your rupees. Fix the damn door yourself. The Kirby series has evolved, refined, and experimented a lot over the last 3 decades, so it's impressive just how much of the heart and soul of this series can be found in the 1993 late-stage NES release, Kirby's Adventure. The simple platforming mechanics, as well as the standard Kirby suck jobs, are all present and accounted for here. Where Kirby's Adventure arguably changed everything for the little pink guy forever was in the groundbreaking addition from director Masahiro Sakurai, the copy ability. If you know the Kirby series, then you know the copy ability is still a fundamental component to almost every Kirby game. Like Mario has his jumping boots, Kirby has his mouth, and never shall the pair meet. Kirby's ability not only adds a good deal more fun to a game that was pretty entertaining to begin with, but the copy ability also adds depth to how you progress through a bright, charming, and also relatively easy game that does come back with a tougher than you might think third act if you aren't ready for it. Kirby's Adventure, like any of the best Kirby games, can surprise you in all sorts of amazing ways, even in 2024. With a soundtrack that is almost guaranteed to get stuck in your head for the rest of your wretched life without a new F-Zero game, Punch-Out is another NES game that hasn't given up much with time. The graphics were pretty damn good for a 1987 console game, and the character designs for opponents like Glass Joe, Bold Bull, and King Hippo have only gotten more endearing. The controls are extremely simple, with a level of accessibility and cartoon appeal that has made the game one of the most beloved on the NES. Nostalgia aside, Punch-Out remains one of the most addictive and demanding games the console ever produced. Anyone can pick up the controller, get a sense of their surroundings, and find themselves working on the disciplined, deliberate strategy that must be employed in order to defeat a string of massive opponents on your road to the championship. Punch-Out is a game that will have you tearing your heart out until you get it right, but few games in the near 40 years since its release have ever felt as satisfying when you pull it off. With practice and memory, anyone can pull off that seemingly impossible response to the impending fury of Macho Man, Mr. Dream, or maybe some prelim bum named Michael Tyson? Who the hell's that? As we all eventually come to grips with the harrowing reality that Castlevania III Dracula's Curse is 4 decades old, we can also appreciate what is arguably the best of this franchise on the Nintendo Entertainment System. Castlevania III Dracula's Curse went bigger on everything, including story, graphics, and another electrifying vintage Konami soundtrack. Most of the issues people had with Simon's Quest were addressed, creating a considerably less obtuse but no less challenging story that set a full century before the events of the previous 2 games. Dracula's Curse also retained the basic components of why people loved Castlevania in the first place, namely careful platforming, killing vampires and other monsters with a trusty whip, and maybe kicking up a secret or two. Recruitable companions and paths that could branch off and provide a completely different playing experience added layers to a game that was already pretty good to begin with. Graphically and in terms of another Konami banger soundtrack, we're talking about elements of why this game is still great that can be found in most modern Metroidvania games. Because yeah, they did get their inspiration from somewhere. You could drop this 30-plus-year-old game into the middle of the current video game landscape, and Castlevania III Dracula's Curse would handle itself just damn well fine. The early Dragon Warrior games are worth a look if you're a fan of old school JRPGs, and Dragon Warrior 4 in particular is the best one of the franchise's NES run. This impressively expansive 8-bit story is spread across 5 distinct chapters that each focus on a different protagonist, with the 5th and final chapter being the lengthy tale of the game's actual hero, who must bring all of the previously introduced plot elements and characters together. That's pretty cool. It's extremely ambitious for a 90s NES RPG, and you have to marvel even now at how much of an improvement this 4th game was on every level. Dragon Warrior 4 also added fun new features like relatively easier options for saving your game, in addition to a tactics system that allowed you to program party members to carry out specific strategies. A feature that might be a bit familiar to Final Fantasy XII fans. All 12 of you.
I'm joking.
These improvements for Dragon Warrior 4 helped to pave the way for a franchise that would become absolute RPG royalty and continue to produce excellent games to this day. For some fans, Dragon Warrior 4 is virtually timeless in its appeal as the first truly good Dragon Quest game. If you're biding your time until Dragon Quest XII, you could do a lot worse. While the first NES TMNT game really isn't as bad as some claim, the sequel, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, the arcade game, went for a far more straightforward and crowd-pleasing approach. Released as a surprisingly robust port of the 1989 arcade hit in 1990, TMNT 2 is a side-scrolling beat-em-up loaded with references and characters from the cartoon. More than the game before it, this was the first Turtles game to really feel as though it came from the world of these characters. Besides atmosphere and source material accuracy, which are pretty pointless if the game itself isn't fun to play, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, the arcade game, is just pure brawling entertainment. You don't need to know a thing about these characters or even how to play video games to pick up the NES controller and start kicking ass in a matter of seconds. The difficulty in Tumut 2 Tag, I'm not saying the whole thing again, is balanced throughout, and the wide variety of enemies and situations gives you the sense of playing through an episode of the classic TV series. This is the approach that most of the future best TMNT games would follow. The recent Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge brought a slew of new ideas to the table, but it also came with a deep respect for the very simple, enduringly addictive side-scrolling brawler formula that began with the arcade TMNT game and this impressive 1990 port that still is a whipper. According to our last NES specific video, not including Blaster Master was a bit of a faux pas. There was surprise, shock, and even the implication of criminal charges from one passionate commenter. The only crime we're guilty of is cramming in pointless references like Leon does pointless backflips. Watch that beautiful fringe saw. A platformer slash run and gun shooter that launched on the NES in 1988, Blaster Master is actually the localized version of a Japanese game called...
Get ready, everybody. He's about to do something stupid.
Chowakusei Senki Metafight, sorry all of Japan, though it translates into English as Superplanetary War Chronicle Metafight, which is absolutely beautiful. Its success would create a series that's still going to this day, kind of. While the story for the original Japanese release and the rest of the world would differ, Blaster Master follows a young lad by the name of Jason who follows his pet frog down a massive hole in his back garden. Once he's tumbled down this frog hole, Jason's version of Wonderland includes an armoured tank called Sophia the Third and a horde of violent radioactive mutants who live underground. Time to open the tank, shoot the crap out of some muties, and find your lost frog. Essentially, you've got a really fun game that's equal parts Fury, the Toxic Avenger, and Big the Cat's levels from Sonic Adventure. With a mix like that, no wonder the comments were ready for a battle. Before Orpheus was perhaps known as being that singing guy in Supergiant's Hades or for ruining the idea of facial hair completely, the mythical bard was given a lead role in his own video game, which was the Battle of Olympus on the NES. Set in a version of ancient Greece that's basically being ravaged by the Lord of the Underworld, the game opens with Hades himself kidnapping Orpheus's lover. Ditching the loot for a wooden club, Orpheus decides that girlfriend abduction just isn't cricket, actually, old chap, and resolves to explore ancient Greece in order to gather the strength, tools, and favour needed to make the journey into the bowels of Tartarus. Heavily inspired by Nintendo's own Zelda 2 The Adventure of Link, like most side-scrolling RPGs on the NES, you'll move through various screens, killing monsters and upgrading your weapons and skills as you complete the various side quests you find. Admittedly, the combat isn't quite as diverse as Zelda's, with Orpheus lacking abilities such as the downward stab when in midair, but the scale on offer here and the lusciousness of the game's backgrounds really highlight the best of what the NES was capable of. Besides, who doesn't love a quick dive into Greek mythology every now and again? Nothing's more zen than ripping a few heads off, after all. If you were to just glance at the gameplay of Zen Intergalactic Ninja, you'd be forgiven for thinking that it's yet another hardcore ninja platformer in the same vein as the original Ninja Gaiden games or Shinobi. That's not entirely wrong, as you're slashing your way through various levels while literally everything is trying to kill you, but Zen Intergalactic Ninja's graphics make it one of the best examples of its genre. From the colourful characters' different perspectives or the intricate backgrounds across the many levels, Zen is a real looker on the NES. What some might not know about Zen Intergalactic Ninja is that it's actually based on a lesser-known series of comic books that launched in 1987. The result of a genetic experiment, Zen himself, not the comic books, he becomes a highly trained martial artist and galactic mercenary for hire, with the game in particular seeing Zen take on a villain known as Lord Contaminus, who is insistent on contaminating the Earth's environment via pollution.
I know writers who use subtext and they're all cowards.
If you want a slice of hardcore action platforming on the NES, Zen is the perfect game to play thanks to its diverse gameplay, lovely visuals, and a surprising variety of effects, but that's not a gimmick. This is. Not to be confused with a manga release from the mid-2000s, Gimmick, or Gimmick if we're being literal, is an NES platformer that launched in 1992 that featured the most adorable green critter this side of Bubble Bubble. Anyone who's up on their console release dates will already know that 1992 was pretty late for an NES release, as the Super Famicom already launched in Japan in 1990 before being renamed as the SNES for the West in 1991 and 1992. Sunsoft developing an NES game that late into the console cycle seemed foolish, especially one that reportedly required a large development team, but all of that time and effort paid off as the game was met with abject apathy when it launched. In fact, the only Western release that Gimmick received was in Scandinavia, specifically as Mr. Gimmick. Okay. The game itself, though, is a wonderful yet difficult 2D platformer that utilised the best knowledge and technology the NES could handle to create advanced graphics and sounds. You play as a green creature called Yumataro who becomes a young girl's new favourite toy, much to jealousy of all her existing toys. One dimension hopping kidnapping later, you're tasked with the rescue. The developers implemented advanced tile set algorithms to free up the NES's computing power and create better looking graphics, while the cartridge shipped with an enhanced sound chip for better quality music. If you feel like seeing the game for yourself, you don't need to hoist sail for this one, matey, as Gimmick Special Edition is available on every modern platform, and there's even a sequel if you're feeling bold. Dash is next. By the time that the NES released, Boulder Dash had been around the block and back again already, having launched on Atari's 8-bit computers back in 1984. It takes 6 years before the NES would see its own version, with Boulder Dash getting releases on the likes of the Apple II, Amiga, Commodore 64 and the Spectrum, along with some arcade releases to boot. Who would have thought a frustrating puzzle platformer about dodging rocks would make for a good quarter muncher, eh? Still, despite the various versions and even sequels, Boulder Dash's release on the NES was something special. Compared to the drab, dreary and somewhat lifeless colours and sprites that other consoles had to offer, the NES in comparison felt like a rainbow explosion shooting straight out of the TV. The core gameplay remains the same though, with you controlling Rockford in a bid to grab as many diamonds as you can from underground, while trying to avoid the ever-present threat of falling boulders. As far as gameplay design goes, Boulder Dash is practically timeless, inspiring the likes of Mr. Driller in the process, but those graphic upgrades really help distinguish the NES version from its contemporaries. A nice boxed copy of this won't cost you an arm and a leg either. Does that work? Anyway, next one. The NES might not have been most famous for its racing games, but those it did have were either top-down racers like Micro Machines or Road Fighter, or the standard behind-the-car races that have become the gaming standard. Days of Thunder, Turbo Racing and Rad Racer are some prominent examples. Of course, Nintendo themselves decided to do things differently with Excite Bike, which blended racing with side-scrolling somehow, but beyond that, few try to break the mold or make a racing game different from anything else, which is why RC Pro-Am deserves recognition among the best NES games that hold up. As the name implies, RC Pro-Am is all about racing remote-controlled cars as fast as possible, but the racing is done from an isometric perspective. That might sound a bit confusing, but the controls and gameplay are actually easy to pick up and play. However, it's the graphics on show here that offers some of the best that the racing game genre on the NES has to offer, thanks in large part to its bright colours and easy to understand sprites and backgrounds. No wonder the game's developers, Rare, would work closely with Nintendo for a long time after RC Pro-Am. If the name Clash at Demonhead sounds familiar, Scott Pilgrim creator Brian Lee O'Malley got the name for the band from this, as it was the first NES game he ever played, and it also sounds cool as hell. However, Clash at Demonhead, the game, doesn't get the respect it deserves for being an open-ended platformer in an era of linear move left to right and just stomp on someone's head platformers. In fact, you could argue that Clash also helped usher in the Metroidvania genre, though I'm not sure how the genre would be titled if Clash at Demonhead was crowbarred in there instead. Demonoid? Best answers in the comments, please. Playing as a hero inexplicably named Billy Big Bang Blitz, which is a Hall of Fame pick for best character names in gaming, you're trying to stop a doomsday device from blowing up the entire world by gathering the 6 medallions needed to do so from the various governors that rule over the region of Demonhead. Because the first word in the name is Clash though, you're primarily doing this via running, jumping and shooting, but the beauty of Demonhead is that players can explore the world however they like, choosing levels known as routes in any order. Naturally, skills and weapons you unlock along with the characters you meet will reveal new paths and and secrets in other routes. If any NES game could do with a modern port, Demonhead is probably it. Okay, so if you thought Gimmick launching in 1992 was a bit late for an NES release, Zoda's Revenge Star Tropics 2 is a whole other story. While Gimmick was created by another company, Nintendo actually developed and published Star Tropics 2 for release on the NES in 1994. This makes it one of the last games on the NES, and the last developed with specifically the NES in mind. Officially anyway. With 4 years of added time since the upgrade to the SNES though, Zoda's Revenge Star Tropics 2 manages to be one of the most impressive games on the entire console. Continuing on from where the first game left off, which is a whipper of its own too, by the way, Zoda's Revenge Star Tropics 2 sees protagonist Mike Jones now travelling across time in a bid to defeat his mortal nemesis, the alien Zoda. The graphics and imagination on show in Star Tropics 2 are fantastic, while the gameplay builds on the original's formula with new weapons, locations, and enemies. Despite the 4-year gap between the SNES's release and the launch of Star Tropics 2 on the NES, Nintendo managed to prove that if the game is good, it doesn't matter what hardware it launches on, build it and the people will come. All together now. Licensed games can often be bad, but they can also be confusing. Depending on the platform, you'd often get a completely different game entirely, and Willow was no exception. Despite the fact that both games are developed by Capcom, the arcade release and NES release are completely different. The arcade version plays like a side-scrolling platformer similar to Ghouls and Ghosts, while the NES version is a top-down RPG similar to Zelda. There was a Commodore version too that analysts call pure shite. Somewhat following the events of the film Willow for the NES sees players controlling the titular character, who's played by the iconic Warwick Davis, as they travel across the land in a bid to defeat evil. Along the way, you'll level up, unlock new weapons and skills, and encounter other characters in your quest. In terms of gameplay, there's no question that Willow is a touch derivative of Zelda's work, but in terms of graphical capabilities, Willow is among the best that the console has to offer. And that's even with Warwick Davis looking like he's holding 200 sweets in his mouth on the game's cover. What's up, Warwick? Why'd you look like that? So yeah, finishing off with less of a hidden gem and more of a bona fide whipper, Bionic Commando is proof that video games about killing Nazis are always fun. The game's ending was even famous for showing a few frames of Hitler's head exploding, but we lost out on that when Bionic Commando for the Famicom was ported from Japan to the rest of the world for the NES. We also lost the amazing name of Hitler's Resurrection, top secret. Bionic Commando generally though is an incredibly well-made platformer slash run and gun shooter, which is especially baffling considering that the game removes one of the core features of those games: jumping. Instead of relying on the contractions of your leg muscles to go upwards, you use a grappling hook that replaces one of your arms, which makes getting around the game's various levels a bit more challenging than usual platforming games. Throw in the game's lovely graphics, large levels, and the ability to choose which levels to tackle, and there's a reason why this is a classic that stands the test of time. Now, I think it's time we all admit that arm wives are not that silly, and definitely good game design, actually. In hindsight, X-Men 2 Clone Wars sounds like some sort of unholy collaboration between Marvel and Star Wars, though, considering both are owned by Disney at this point, let's stop talking just in case someone from Disney is watching. And they usually are. And if they are, release the Treasure Planet 4K Blu-ray, cowards. A platformer,
which was the style at the time.
X-Men 2 Clone Wars adapted the Phalanx storyline that was happening within the comic books, with Big Baldy himself, Charles Xavier, sending the X-Men out to a Sentinel manufacturing facility in the middle of nowhere. The Phalanx, which was an alien hive mind of sorts that behaves like a highly infectious techno-organic virus, my least favourite kind of virus, has begun assimilating organisms to take over the world, and it's up to Beast, Psylocke, Gambit, Nightcrawler, Wolverine, and Cyclops to save the day. Oh, and Magneto, because the leader of the Brotherhood can't rule the Earth if the Phalanx takes his home of Exodus. The enemy of my enemy is not my enemy for a little bit, whatever the saying is. While X-Men 2 Clone Wars received mixed reviews at the time of release in 1995, its stock has risen considerably in the years since, with many retrospective reviews commenting on the beautiful graphics and killer soundtrack. However, it's the pick up and play gameplay that's the real winner for this game. The controls are easy to learn, while each character has their own unique abilities that help them in both combat and platforming. Compared to other comic book games of the time where character selection came across like a cosmetic choice rather than a mechanical one, X-Men 2 Clone Wars feels like it graduated first in class and its days aren't future past. We'll workshop that. Apocalypse. These days, the Phantasy Star series is mostly known as an MMORPG franchise, bringing together thousands of players for the common goal of completing raids and building houses, apparently. Before the advent of Ethernet cables and that awful dial-up connection noise though, Phantasy Star was Sega's equivalent of Final Fantasy, offering turn-based RPGs on the Master System and Sega Genesis. These 4 games have been received pretty well over the years, but most would tend to agree that the first 2 or 3 games have been dated a bit more than other RPGs of the time period. Phantasy Star IV, The End of the Millennium, on the other hand, has only improved in the estimation of many, and considering it was already a pretty well received RPG, you know it's aged pretty dang well. The conclusion of a story surrounding the Algol star system, despite being set about 1,000 years between the events of both Phantasy Star 2 and 3, Phantasy Star 4 starts on Motavia, a once thriving planet that's begun to deteriorate as ancient technology fails and mutant aberrations called biomonsters have been springing up like hipster coffee shops in newly gentrified urban areas. You'll gather a band of hunters to find out the source of the planet's ills, uncovering a threat to the entire star system in the process. The turn-based combat and exploration are still brilliant today like they were in the 90s, but the improvements Phantasy Star IV made to its own formula, such as combo attacks and the manga quality art for cutscenes and conversations, have helped cement Phantasy Star IV as a greatest of all time contender. Quick question for you, what was the last Phantasy Star game that Sonic team developed? Comment the answer down below and you could win a free Steam key for free. Turns out that it wasn't just the console itself that was subject to name changes depending on the region it was being sold in, as some of the games went through that process too. In this instance though, North America might have got the better name, as Beyond Oasis feels like a more accurate title for the game than The Story of Thor, its name here in Europe. I mean, Beyond Oasis doesn't even have a dude swinging a tiny little hammer, and the box art is so basic. Don't worry, Europe would get its revenge eventually though. Mythical nonsense aside, while Beyond Oasis doesn't have any real ties to Norse mythology, it does showcase Sega's pretty viable alternative to Nintendo's The Legend of Zelda series that has surprisingly not been appreciated a lot by Sega themselves for a long time. Set in the titular land of Oasis, players control the warrior Prince Ali, who has recently gained possession of a golden amulet that belonged to an ancient wizard. Suddenly, a vision of flame tells him that an evildoer is going to use a silver armlet to spread chaos, and that Ali needs to reunite the 4 elemental spirits to save the land. The gameplay pretty closely follows the Zelda format, playing out like an action-adventure as Ali explores the world, finding dungeons filled with new weapons and elemental spirits to recruit. And while the homework-copied version of Zelda's gameplay might not be Beyond Oasis's best feature, the absolutely incredible graphics have ensured that this game has remained a highlight of the Sega Genesis well into the 2020s. We could make a whole point out of how Vector Man has aged incredibly well based purely on its plot alone, which starts with humanity leaving Earth behind thanks to unchecked pollution, while robots have been left to clean up the mess. The obvious plot comparisons to WALL-E come to screeching halt though, when one of the robots basically straps themselves to a nuke and becomes the tyrant warhead, but it's clear that Vector Man's plot was more forward-thinking than other video games of the time. Clearly, the fine chaps at both Sega and Blue Sky Software, not to be confused with Blue Sky Studios, the team behind Ice Age, were concerned about the environment being ravaged and the dangers of AI in control of human weaponry way before they became some of the most common talking points of the 2020s. Metal Gear Solid 2, eat your heart out. Admittedly, Vector Man's gameplay isn't quite what makes it such a timeless classic, though the TD shoot 'em up gameplay is just as competent as many other games from the Sega Genesis. However, it's Vector Man's graphical qualities that make it such a wonderful game to play today, with the animation of Vector Man himself and the beautiful backgrounds proving that the Sega Genesis still had some juice in the tank at the tail end of its life cycle. Shame then that Sega have basically left Vector Man to rot in the vaults in the years since, as this original game stands among the best that the Genesis has to offer. The sequel is pretty good too, if you like shooting bugs instead of robots. Can we get through one of these videos without hyping up our beloved Treasure just a little bit? Treasure lived up to their name by being one of the most imaginative and innovative developers of the Sega Genesis era. They might have been a bit of a buried prize for some, but for those willing to do a bit of digging, Treasure was the byword for incredible quality games. As for the best Treasure game on the Genesis, most would tend to focus on games like Gunstar Heroes or Dynamite Headdy, both of which are excellent in their own right, but we're focusing on a Treasure game that doesn't get the love it deserves sometimes: Alien Soldier. A shoot-'em-up that's been compared heavily and favourably to Gunstar Heroes, Alien Soldier's baffling plot of human-animal hybrid terrorists and the game's protagonist, Epsilon Eagle, living as a parasite inside a young boy isn't just a discarded Rick and Morty episode. Instead, Alien Soldier feels like one of the earliest versions of a boss rush style game, with 25 levels of run and gun gameplay mostly defined by some incredible boss fights. The animation that Treasure utilises for these fights is nothing short of technological wizardry, creating some of the most memorable enemies on the entire console. Meanwhile, players could choose their weapon loadouts after every continue, adding more strategy and depth to what could have been a simple yet brutally difficult shooter. If you want to see where the DNA of Cuphead came from, Alien Soldier is a pretty great starting point. Racing games typically either age beautifully or they age like Fast and the Furious movies 5 minutes after they come out. Typically, it's the more realistic racing games that tend to age the worst, as either the handling starts to feel dated or the graphics have been rendered awful by the passage of time. Virtua Racing sits more in the former category, which is just as well as it's considered to be the racing game genre's first proper foray into the third dimension, though I will always remember that arcade game in Dawn of the Dead. While the handling takes plenty of getting used to for the average player these days, the general gameplay is just as fun now as it was on the Genesis in the 90s. Quite frankly, the fact that Virtua Racing was even able to run on the Genesis possibly proves that Sega dabbled in the dark arts at one point, though the trade-off was that Virtua Racing retailed at $100 at launch. Oof. The incredible blocky graphics have certainly aged compared to the lavish production values of most modern racing games, but that doesn't mean that Virtua Racing has lost a step in the aesthetics department. The bright colours certainly help, and the fact that this is the first 3D racing game of its kind means all the Gran Turismos and Burnouts of the world have this game to thank. Still, the influx of indie racing games like Hot Shot Racing, Formula Retro Racing, and Super Retro GP have proved that there's plenty of nostalgia and love for games like Virtua Racing. Virtua Racing might not have a lot of tracks, but it does boast plenty of heart, and you can't deny that. However, it doesn't have the iconic music from Daytona USA, so it's clearly an inferior game. We don't make the rules. Actually, we do. Spin that music. Yes, come on! While DC animated projects can be a mixed bag in terms of quality, especially with some of DC's more recent efforts, that Injustice adaptation, more like just piss. Pretty much everyone can agree that the original Batman the Animated Series from the 90s stands among the best superhero shows ever made. The animation style, particularly with regards to the city of Gotham, was unlike anything else of the time period, while the show was anchored by two perfect performances in Kevin Conroy, rest in peace, and Mark Hamill as Batman and Joker respectively. Shockingly, the tie-in video game, named The Adventures of Batman and Robin after the show's second season rebrand, has also aged pretty well, and that's largely based on the aesthetics. Yeah, sure, the gameplay has earned its fair share of criticism, being derided as a fairly simplistic throwing batarangs 'em up that also manages to be frustrating and difficult at the same time. The amount of enemies you have to deal with and the health of many of the bosses gets a bit nuts at a certain point, but the graphics, oof, those graphics, especially the colours and 3D effects on the level backgrounds, pushes the tech of the Genesis in ways few other games did. Artistically, the developers of The Adventures of Batman and Robin had a huge standard to live up to, given the TV show's incredible success, but this game manages to stand on its own with impressive visuals that many thought the Genesis wouldn't be capable of. Say, do you want a pretty reliable way to make a game timeless? Well, just make a 2D beat-em up, as the legendary beat-em-ups of the SNES and Genesis era are just as much fun to play now as they were back in the 80s and 90s. Final Fight, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Golden Axe and more are all incredibly fun to play today, but perhaps the best of the best is Streets of Rage 2. While the first game is a bit too simplistic in its graphics and gameplay compared to other beat-em-up games of the time period, Streets of Rage 2 is a massive improvement over its predecessor. Despite saving the city in the last game, Axel and Blaze are forced into action again when previous game comrade Adam is kidnapped by Mr. X. With goons on the streets again causing chaos, Axel and Blaze, alongside newcomers Max and Skate, take to cracking skulls in order to achieve justice. The soundtrack alone has been regarded among some of the best music ever created for video games, which is definitely a bold claim, but the gameplay is where Streets of Rage 2 improved immeasurably, with new options like blitz attacks and character-specific special moves ensuring there was more to offer skilled players. If you want to experience the best that the Streets of Rage series has, well, arguably before Streets of Rage 4 came out anyway, Streets of Rage 2 might just be the best beat-em-up game on the Genesis. Hang around until the end of the video for a neat little Easter egg. Sega Genesis certainly boasted its fair share of RPGs, but one subgenre in particular that was well represented on Sega's console was the tactical RPG. Made famous by games like Tactics Ogre and others, Shining Force 2 was perhaps the console's best take on the tactical RPG genre, with most of the reviews at the time considering it to be an instant classic. Just like Tactics Ogre and the Ogre Battle series as a whole, Shining Force 2 is actually just one part of the wider Shining series, which has nothing to do with blood gushing from an elevator and instead boasts dungeon crawlers, action RPGs and tactical RPGs. But Shining Force 2 is perhaps the best known and most loved entry in the whole franchise. Like other RPGs, Shining Force 2 sees you assembling a party to go out and save the world, with players controlling the Shining Force leader, Bowie. Battles play out on a square-based grid, with characters able to move and perform one action on their turn, and Bowie needs to be protected at all costs, otherwise it's game over. While the graphics aren't really the best that the Sega Genesis has ever seen, the gameplay ideas and structures shown in Shining Force 2 have aged like fine wine. The gaming industry has seen a huge wave of tactical RPGs dropping across all platforms in recent years, but a lot of the ideas and DNA can be traced back to games like Shining Force 2, making them shining examples of games that have aged wonderfully.
Ugly shot! No good! Yes!
talk about lightning in a bottle when it comes to NBA Jam, eh? Midway managed to capture the perfect formula of licensed sports games with NBA Jam in 1993, offering licensed players and teams along with simple to learn gameplay and over-the-top antics and hidden characters. Who doesn't want to see professional basketball players square off against the likes of Bill Clinton? Oh yeah, okay. So yes, some aspects of NBA Jam might not have aged as well as others, but this 2v2 version of Hoops offered a recipe for sports games that has seemingly fallen by the wayside, annoyingly, at least when it comes to the licensed offerings. We can always rely on a Mario sports game to bring the silly by the bucket load, thankfully. NBA Jam and the improved Tournament Edition both offered that beloved over-the-top take on 2v2 basketball, with Tournament Edition in particular adding the titular tournament mode, new players to choose from, and a whole new slew of Easter eggs for players to discover. After TE though, the NBA license split between Midway and Acclaim, with Acclaim taking the NBA Jam name in a more sim direction for some reason, and Midway's NBA titles would try to replicate the arcade nature of those first NBA Jam titles to lesser success. Both would ultimately flounder, and while 2K have tried to replicate the arcade-like gameplay of NBA Jam with the NBA Playgrounds games, nothing quite managed to hit the same as hearing Tim Kitzrow screaming,
Boom, shakalaka!
There's a big reason why basketball had a lot of success in the UK in the 1990s, and it's not just because of Space Jam. Shadowrun is a long dormant IP in the video game realm that we don't think people talk about nearly enough. While well known and well liked among die-hard SNES fans, Shadowrun really should come up more frequently in conversations about the best SNES games. A cyberpunk fantasy action RPG isn't exactly a major genre on the Super Nintendo for one, and the combination of the gameplay with some rich, compelling cyberpunk aesthetics makes for something we wish the console saw a bit more of. A skill-based RPG with action-focused combat, Shadowrun has chunky depth to its leveling and spell learning, with fast-paced fighting sequences that keep the game from getting monotonous. It's an excellent choice for action RPG fans and turn-based players alike, with the game itself being based on a pen and paper role-playing game. There's a twisted noir quality to Shadowrun, beginning from the moment you wake up and escape from your own slab at the morgue. The world of Shadowrun is one in which elves and orcs exist alongside a time and place that might remind you of Blade Runner, or maybe that Will Smith movie? Anyone remember that? It's a mix of ideas that hold up extremely well today, unlike that Will Smith movie, and we only wish the promised sequel at the end of the first game had materialised, though Shadowrun Returns did end up being a good old time. Shadowrun in video game form was last seen with Shadowrun Hong Kong, a solid but somewhat already forgotten tactical RPG. Shame. Yeah, we're pretty fond of Chrono Trigger around these parts, so it shouldn't be too surprising to see it make an appearance here. It's no F-Zero, because nothing is, but it is pretty good. Released by Square in 1995 as one of their last games for the Super Nintendo, the game was rightly celebrated for some of the best graphics on the SNES, and they still look beautiful today. Seriously, you don't need an emulator for this thing. Dust off the SNES, blow in the cart and convince yourself it actually does do something, and get thoroughly bunga-bungered. The distinct, varied pixelated characters and absolutely stunning town maps and backgrounds still pull in players nearly 30 years later. The score by Yasunori Mitsuda and Nobuo Uematsu is also one of the best for the console, which is saying a lot as Square alone released a number of exceptional JRPGs with banger soundtracks on the console. Chrono Trigger also ages well in the gameplay department, using relatively standard but still slick RPG mechanics and Square's famous active time battle system to make a game that's a breeze to pick up and play. It's a perfect RPG in every way, and it's one people continue to play and love in droves. I need to finish my recent playthrough on Steam Deck, but I am really struggling for time. I don't know if you know this, you might have heard some rumours. Super Mario World is great. But the 1995 sequel, Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island, deserves just as much love. The game would take Mario's flagship SNES series in a very different direction, both in terms of visuals and gameplay, creating something as unique as it is timeless. Yoshi's Island may, at times be the best advert for contraception there is. But that's a small price to pay for a platformer that's as much fun to play now as it was when the game was first released on the SNES in 1995, especially if your hearing has gone a bit in those years. Decades on, the bright, cartoonish storybook graphics are a blast of pure pastel brilliance. Yoshi's Island remains a challenging, surprisingly complex 16-bit platformer that even its most experienced players can get lost in. Exploration is key in Yoshi's Island, and the breathtaking world that it all takes place in makes that easy. There's really nothing else like it, well, except for Go-Go Beckham Adventure on Soccer Island on the Game Boy Advance, apparently. Would you guys like a video on rip-offs of Nintendo games? I mean, Garfield would dominate, but yeah, let us know down below. While it did good sales in Japan, where it was known as Mother 2, and at least respectable sales for a mid-90s RPG in the West, the 1995 release Earthbound was quickly forgotten by all but a small cult following. You gotta remember, this was a time when this was the future of gaming for some people. 2D games were beginning to be looked at as a little uncool, and then Bubsy 3D came out a year later and blew everyone's minds. Maybe that Mario game as well did something? I don't know. That following for Earthbound has grown exponentially over the years, owing to Earthbound characters and world appearing in various Super Smash Bros. Games, as well as Earthbound getting releases for the SNES Classic and the Wii Virtual Shop. And also, like, credit card companies, we guess? It's available to play today on the Switch's Virtual SNES, and you owe it to yourself to see why Earthbound is one of the best aged games on the Super Nintendo. A charming story with RPG mechanics and character-filled graphics, Earthbound mixes vintage Americana with a very bizarre, surprisingly dark plot concerning a group of kids who must destroy an alien traveller known as Gigas. There's also a brilliant sense of humour in everything from item descriptions to the most casual NPC dialogue, or even just the battle screen. These qualities have inspired numerous games over the years, but most notably in Undertale. Earthbound has its little frustrations, particularly when it comes to inventory management, but even after all these years, it's aged to close to perfection. Just like that meme where we all harassed Reggie constantly for like a decade to release Mother 3. Right, guys? Yeah? Among the many beat-em-ups that have been released under the TMNT banner over the years, Turtles in Time might be the best release to consoles over the years. Second perhaps only to the recent Shredder's Revenge, the 25 plus year time span between those games should tell you how brilliantly this banger holds up. TMNT 4 Turtles in Time has the basic save April, save the world premise, get the hell away from me Zachary Quinto, but with the added spark of Shredder sending the Turtles into the past, where nothing bad has ever happened because the old times were better. Your travels take you to the Wild West, prehistoric times, and even the future, fighting a wide assortment of enemies and bosses along the way. It's pretty straightforward stuff on paper, except that when you combine that simple pleasure of knocking mutant warthogs around with a responsive, perfect control scheme, you have an enduring classic. Turtles in Time also look remarkable in arcades, with the SNES port being shockingly close to perfect. It's still a game that can visually grab your attention, and the sheer joy of bashing monsters and robots alongside your friends means you don't have to care a single bit about the Turtles to love this game. I can't tell my Raziel from my D'Angelo, whatever they're called, and I can still mess with Turtles in Time. And dude just sat the fuck up somewhere. Selling well over 1 million copies, Kirby Superstar was a surprising lifeline for the SNES so late in its lifespan. With the Nintendo 64 release just 3 months later, a graphically stunning collection of smaller Kirby games that had the best controls and special abilities of the entire series up to that point was a great way to prove Nintendo's arguable best console still had a lot to offer. Pick up the game today and you'll find that most of your Kirby Superstar nostalgia holds up nicely as well. Some of these smaller minigames do get pretty tiring pretty fast, but the core platformers featured here provide some of the best Kirby gameplay of the era. Spring Breeze offers a delightful, albeit abridged remake of Kirby's 1992 Game Boy debut, while modes like the Great Cave Offensive put Kirby in a game that could be described as a casual Metroidvania. Revenge of Meta Knight offers a relatively spicier challenge, and there's a ton of two-player fun to be found too. Kirby hasn't deviated too terribly far from the formula you'll find in Kirby Superstar. The dude eating cars does still feel pretty on brand. If you're a Kirby fan, that's obviously not a bad thing, and it makes Superstar pretty damn timeless. We're going to go with the first game in the Mega Man X series, released at the height of the SNES's power in 1993, but we think you can pretty much put any Mega Man in here. Alright, maybe not Mega Man Soccer, which becomes funnier when you take the Mega out of its name. Mega Man X reimagined the NES's beloved Blue Bomber as a weary soldier in a dark future, but didn't take the character too far away from what made these Capcom platformers some of the best of their kind in the history of the medium. We wish we could say the same for Bomberman though. Mega Man X was a game clearly designed from the ground up to take advantage of the power of the Super Nintendo. From the moment the game drops us into the city, suddenly rushing to fight robot enemies and meet an unknown, potentially unstoppable force, Mega Man X presents a more intense Mega Man experience than anything before. Like the best Mega Man games, the first X release features sharp character designs that inspire legions of indie games today, an incredible soundtrack, and controls that almost anyone can pick up in a few minutes. But it's the challenge of Mega Man X that also makes this game an essential play for anyone new to what the Super Nintendo brought to the table. Just remember to use Electric Spark on the final boss and show him who the real Sigma is. While very similar in certain regards, the Capcom-developed Disney's Aladdin for the SNES is ultimately a completely different game from the one developed by Virgin and Sega for the Genesis. Is it better? Well, that's ultimately up to you, but if you're a fan of the amazing Disney platforms Capcom developed for both the NES and SNES, this version of Disney's Aladdin will have a lot to offer. Aladdin on the Super Nintendo looks as sharp as ever, and while the gameplay itself may not be quite as varied as its Genesis counterpart, there's also something ageless about Capcom and really damn good platforming games. Especially when they look and sound like one of the best examples of what this hardware could do in the early 90s, and why people are still flocking to that hardware years later. The only bad thing you can really say about Disney's Aladdin is that it's much too short. Grab it on the Disney Classic Games collection and use it as a palate cleanser when The Lion King has you nearly blacking out from frustration. Developers don't hate the kids like they used to, do they? They just don't. Fun fact, Shinji Mikami, he of Resident Evil, Dino Crisis God Hand and Vanquish fame, give Vanquish its flowers people, designed this game early on in his career, but actually seems to prefer the Genesis game. I mean, yeah, there's not really a whole lot of new stuff you can say about one of the most influential games of all time that still really does hold up. Super Metroid has done more than arguably any other game, apart from maybe the other bit in the Metroidvania name, to create the core concepts that would form the basis of some of the greatest indie games ever made. Without Super Metroid, there's probably no Hollow Knight and Dead Cells. But as for the game itself, from a gameplay and overall presentation standpoint, yeah, it stands up. With new additions like an auto map and being able to fire in every direction, you're still left with one of the very best action platformers ever made that has aged a lot more gracefully than its NES predecessor. Surpassing Super Metroid is a difficult task, but so many indie games on Steam owe their whole existence to Yoshio Sakamoto and Samus Aran. You could play the 6 degrees of separation from basically any game on any storefront and it would probably still come back to Super Metroid. Even now, years and years later, Super Metroid sets a bar for 16-bit platforming that few have ever reached, and that's not going to change anytime soon. While it could be said that both Contra as a franchise and Konami as a developer have both seen better days, with both kind of merely shells of their former best selves, please be good Metal Gear Solid Delta, we at least have undisputed classics like Contra III: The Alien Wars to keep us company. Perhaps the best game in its franchise, The Alien Wars was another early SNES release that was clearly designed to show off just how serious Nintendo was about being competitive in the next console generation. It's an aggressive, deliriously difficult run and gun shooter that still has the teeth to take even the best players to the limit of their mental health. Make no mistake about it, on any setting, Contra III: The Alien Wars is the kind of game that's as fun to play as it is John-maddeningly frustrating. Unless you're some sort of freak of nature, you can expect to die in this game many times. Pressure makes diamonds, and you can't spell diamond without die. Don't look that up. You're gonna get killed often in Contra III: The Alien Wars, but as you might expect from a game that could be a massive hit with players in any decade, you're gonna come back for more because while you might have aged, the classics never truly do. The best thing to come out of Leicester since that cheese, where would DK be without the legends at Rare? Their take on a Nintendo character that, at the time, hadn't been given much of a chance to shine, Donkey Kong Country helped cement DK and the rest of the crew among Mario and the gang, thanks to its brilliant gameplay, charming visuals, and a banging soundtrack from Rare's Grant Kirkhope. While the characters might not be true 3D, with Rare importing 3D models as sprites instead, DKC did offer a glimpse into the future of gaming. Instead of following the original DK from the 1981 game, Donkey Kong Country passed the mantle onto DK Jr., with the redesign being one of the things that really sparked life into DK as a Nintendo mascot. Across 40 levels, you run, jump and batter your way through King K. Rool's forces in an attempt to get your bananas back from the thieving pirates. On a console with plenty of platforming heavyweights, Donkey Kong Country, along with its sequels, hold up among the best of the SNES's library, and they still honestly look a generation ahead of their time. Is it any wonder that Nintendo keeps going to the Donkey Kong Country well every now and again, even today? Don't ask for an actually new game though, let's just keep dipping into the past. I hear you, okay, just because A Link to the Past wasn't mentioned in the first video, it doesn't mean it hasn't aged well, and that kinda goes without saying, hence why it was left off, but now I have to mention it to stop you shouting at me, please, I'm only very small. Widely considered to be among the greatest video games ever made, and rightly so. A Link to the Past arguably set the tone for the Zelda series going forward, marking the debut of elements that had become staples later on, like the Master Sword or the ability to swap between two different worlds. Chances are your favourite part of Zelda first appeared here. A prequel to the first two games in the Zelda series, A Link to the Past sees Link trying to rescue Zelda from Hyrule Castle, as would become tradition going forward. The catch here is there's an evil wizard trying to summon Ganon from the parallel Dark World, with Link travelling around Hyrule to find pendants to locate the Master Sword, the wizard's only weakness. Not that you need it, but if you want proof of how well the gameplay is aged here, it was ported to the Game Boy Advance as part of 4 Swords, but you could very easily pick up your SNES cart of this today, go to blowing it, remember it's apparently bad for it, but then blow in it anyway and get playing one of the greatest games of all time without skipping a beat. It still packs quite the punch. Nintendo really did cook with the simplistic yet infuriatingly difficult game design of Punch-Out! Basically a boss rush disguised as a boxing game, Punch-Out! Put players in the wee shorts of Little Mac, the perennial underdog trying to become a champion in the most poorly regulated boxing league in history. Half of these guys aren't even throwing punches, how can this be legal? The esteemed sport of boxing is better than oh, never mind. Never mind, while Punch-Out! Started life in the arcades, Nintendo pretty effectively ported the experience to the NES with Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! The NES version of Punch-Out! Proved that the arcade experience and gameplay could be ported over to home consoles, but they knocked it out of the park with the SNES sequel. Graphically, this is a real looker, as the bright cartoony visuals represent a leaps and bounds improvement over the original game, while the simple controls and gameplay loop of memorizing the boss's patterns is as timeless as it ever was. Unfortunately, it'd take Nintendo 15 years to make a new Punch-Out! After the SNES game with the pretty overlooked Wii version, and it's been 16 years since then. We did get ARMS though, which is maybe Punch-Out! Adjacent if you squint a bit and ignore the fact that it's entirely different. Maybe we'll see Punch-Out! Return for the Switch 2 alongside F-Zero, and then maybe a flying pig will do my taxes. Saying that Super Mario World is a Super Nintendo game that aged was like saying the sun is bright and that Stacy's mum did in fact have it going on. We've waited for so long to get around to including it, but Super Mario World took an already popular mascot for Nintendo and catapulted him into the stratosphere, creating a platformer that many 2D games of today simply cannot get out of the shadows of. From the music, the graphics, the core gameplay, and the sheer amount of secrets to be found, Super Mario World felt like the next evolution of the Mario Bros. Formula. Despite being set in dinosaur land and containing nary a hint of a mushroom kingdom, Super Mario World introduced a host of features that would become mainstays of the Mario franchise at large. The first Mario game to include an overworld to explore, Super Mario World's biggest contribution would be the introduction of everyone's cute little dinosaur, Yoshi, who would become the protagonist of several other Nintendo platformers in the future, notably in the brilliant, but sometimes headache-inducing sequel. Super Mario World can still absolutely capture your attention today as a formula that has been repeated countless times over the decades, and it still looks and sounds as smooth as it ever was. Is this an obvious inclusion? Yes, but I dare you to argue with it. Actually, don't. I just want a quiet life. You know what though, actually, in your opinion, which Mario games haven't aged well? I immediately think that Super Mario Sunshine has some rough stuff, as much as I love it. Let me know your picks below. Top-down shooters on the Super Nintendo were pretty common, but few had the style and overall mythology that Pocky and Rocky had backing it. A sequel to the arcade game Kiki Kai Kai, Pocky and Rocky follows the titular Shinto shrine Maiden and her Tanuki friend as they try to rescue a rampaging horde of goblins who have been corrupted by evil forces. Despite being a game made in Japan and based almost exclusively on Japanese mythology, Pocky and Rocky has you get in touch with your inner Frank Reynolds, though sadly with a severe lack of eggs to get you through its trying times. Unlike other co-op shooters on the Super Nintendo, like Contra and Smash TV, Pocky and Rocky actually makes both characters distinguishable in terms of abilities. Both Pocky and also Rocky are capable of the same long-range, short-range, and bomb attacks, along with a slide to escape danger, but the attacks themselves, their effectiveness and range are different across both. Throw in some amazing graphics, imaginative enemies and bosses, and some luscious backgrounds, and it's no wonder that Pocky and Rocky is still beloved to this day, along with its also pretty great sequel. Don't beloved these prices though. The retro market really is in fantasy land sometimes, eh? Final Fantasy and the SNES aren't really spoken about in the same way FF and the PS1 are. Unlike the PS1's FF7, 8 and 9, the SNES was only blessed with one Final Fantasy of note, but it's definitely an all-time whipper. Where else can you enjoy the satisfaction of suplexing a train but in Final Fantasy VI? It's funny that Sabin can suplex dragons and most of the other bosses in Final Fantasy VI, but somehow doing a Kurt Angle on a train full of ghosts is unrealistic. I mean, has anyone even tried to give a crippler crossface to a locomotive before? Taking a break from other Final Fantasy settings by opting for a more steampunk-influenced aesthetic, Final Fantasy VI follows a ragtag group of rebels trying to defeat an empire intent on enslaving a race known as the Espers. While I won't spoil anything for people who haven't played it, Final Fantasy VI is beloved among the fans of Final Fantasy and the RPG community at large for offering one of the best mid-game twists in history. The soundtrack is also phenomenal, but it's a Final Fantasy game. Of course the soundtrack is great, while the characters are all pretty likeable without a dud among them, and maybe if Kefka had a badass entrance song like Sephiroth, he would be known as the best Final Fantasy villain ever instead. Yeah, there's not too much to say that hasn't already been said about the arguable peak of 2D Final Fantasy and the arguable peak of the series overall for some. 30 years later, they really ate with this one. You want an eye-catching name for a video game? Try Zombies Ate My Neighbors on for size. Yeah, it's not quite an airport for aliens currently run by dogs, but it's still one of the most genius video game names ever, and the game is pretty good too. A top-down shooter, Zombies Ate My Neighbors oozes B-movie charm, as you control teenagers trying to deal with a horror movie monster uprising in their sleepy little slice of suburbia. Turns out the mad scientist Dr. Tongue has created a bunch of monsters and unleashed them upon the surrounding suburbs, leaving it to Zeke and Julie to save everyone from Tongue's evil plans. Remember kids, creating a zombie army is totally not tubular. The game boasts a staggering 48 levels, not including some optional bonus levels thrown in for good measure, with the objective being to rescue at least one helpless neighbour per level before the legions of zombies, werewolves, vampires, mermaids, aliens, weird blob monsters, squid men, pod people, and other crazy critters that are running amok, gobble them up. Still, none of them are as terrifying as the giant demonic baby that's waiting for you as a boss fight in level 8, Titanic Toddler. Someone must have taken his iPad away. Well, it's got a pretty tough learning curve for modern times, and you're really just gonna suffer if you play it solo instead of in co-op. Zombies Ate My Neighbors is one of the most timeless pick up and play games ever, and you should be under no illusion as to how well it plays today. The Super Nintendo boasts its fair share of dungeon crawling RPGs, so trying to pick just one that holds up can be quite the task. Fortunately, Illusion of Gaia makes an incredible case for itself with its unique story, excellent graphics, and a solid mix of both combat and puzzles to create an RPG for the ages on the SNES. Known as Illusion of Time in Europe for reasons that, we're not entirely sure of, Illusion of Gaia thrusts players straight into the 16th century and asks them to save the world through exploration. It is the age of discovery after all. Playing as Will, an amnesiac who meets the spirit Gaia who puts him on his fateful quest, you're given the ability to transform into different warrior forms, and that's pretty sick. Will's adventure sees him making friends while exploring lots of iconic landmarks across the globe, trying to solve a puzzle that'll prevent a comet from causing a global disaster. With varied combat, excellent graphics, and a globe-trotting story, Gaia is every bit as fun now as it was back in the 90s, though just like Terranigma that followed it, it's still a game that it feels not quite enough people have taken a bite out of. Take a bite? Because vampires? Oh, it's lazy. I'm better than that. No, I'm not actually. Back before the series became known for either its Netflix show, or for being the second half of a portmanteau, or for being a DLC in whichever slightly related game came out that week, the Castlevania series was the pace setter for nearly all action platformers to try and beat. Super Castlevania IV is considered by many to be the best of the best, at least as far as the classic linear platforming era of Castlevania is concerned, before Symphony of the Night decided to take a leaf out of Metroid's book and create a genre indie games would aspire to for generations. If you want the greatest action platformer ever made, Super Castlevania IV is a pretty safe bet. Like all good Castlevania games, SC4 sees a Belmont, Simon for this one, booting down the doors of Dracula's castle to have a big old scrap. Players maneuver through several levels using a variety of weapons, including the iconic whip, laying waste to the undead hordes by the dozen. The incredibly fun action is smooth as margarine, even on the SNES when played today, while Konami made sure to make great use of the SNES's Mode 7 capabilities to create some of the most stunning backgrounds on the entire console. With quality like this, it's no wonder that Castlevania is still beloved and celebrated so much today. But let's finish things off today with the game that really isn't celebrated at all. Anyone who's been watching videos about the Super Nintendo for long enough will know that Japan kept some of the best games for themselves, the selfish gits. One game that some might not have heard but absolutely holds up for scrutiny is...
Get ready, everybody. He's about to do something stupid.
Do-Re-Mi Fantasy Melon no Doki Doki Daiboken. Roughly translated to Melone's Doki Doki Adventure, this is actually a sequel to an NES game called Melone's Secret Castle, which strangely enough did launch in both Japan and America. The reason why Melone's Secret Adventure didn't make the jump is unclear, and it's a real shame, as this is quite the enjoyable platformer. Playing as the titular Melone, you'll explore a range of varied, colourful worlds that combine puzzles, platforming, and a few enemies that need to be dispatched using your trusty bubbles. Weirdly, while the first game adopted a darker tone, Do-Re-Mi Fantasy actually knows what a colour palette is, though the darker tone does return for the levels before boss fights. Between the unique approach to gameplay and combat, the wonderful visuals and animation, and the bags of charm on top of it all, it's no wonder that Do-Re-Mi Fantasy is one of the better platformers on the system, but also one that feels kind of overlooked.
While not the first Metal Gear game in the franchise, Metal Gear Solid proved to be one of the most successful releases on the PS1. It drew rave reviews, sold extremely well, and turned the series into a massively popular franchise. But how does it hold up after a quarter of a century? Better than you might think. While it's true the character models for Metal Gear Solid don't look particularly amazing in a modern light, it hardly matters. MGS still satisfies as a gameplay experience where it counts, including its potent atmosphere, or intrigue and deception in a twisty mission on Shadow Moses carried out by the legendary Solid Snake. At least we're pretty sure that's Solid Snake. Metal Gear Solid's story still hits in spectacular fashion, so the graphics and some super damn cheap and annoying sentries are easy to take as they are. Just like our favourite Japanese animes, the classics never really go out of style. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is one of the rarest PS1 games that your money can buy, which is to say that's quite a bit of money. It is also one of the wildest and most entertaining PS1 fighters that Capcom ever released, and that's certainly saying something for a developer and publisher that had so many good PS1 games, based on the long-running popular anime and manga series. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure doesn't require you to know any of these characters or stories to enjoy the game itself. The game does offer a wildly entertaining story mode that's nicely self-contained, and there's a two-player arcade-style fighting if you and a friend want to pick one of the game's outlandish 18 characters and go at it. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure has the same visual flourish and unique storyline that made it a breath of fresh air back in 1999, and definitely holds up beautifully today. Good luck holding up your marriage if you ever drop 300 bones on buying this physically though. Jeesh. Tekken continues to be a popular, successful franchise in the modern era of gaming, but for some it has never been quite as much fun and even pure as it was in 1998 with the PS1 release of Tekken 3. The arcade version of the game, released a year earlier in 1997, was considered one of the best fighting games of the year. The PlayStation 1 port not only kept everything that people enjoyed from this amazing 3D brawler, it also added a variety of secret modes, extra characters, and enough depth to keep you busy far longer than most fighting games did at the time, and maybe even most fighting games today. The great thing about Tekken 3 is that it almost completely retains everything about it that made the game such a monumental release for Sony's console. The fighting is addictive, complex, and as fast-paced as ever. Pick it up today and you will no doubt have to commit a whole story playthrough with lore, and then constantly kicking your mates in the face until they burst into angry tears. Good times. While it's true that most Mega Man and Mega Man X games are exceptional, enjoyable games in any era, there's something special in particular about Mega Man X4. While the character's run in the PS1 games wasn't perfect, the fourth entry in the spin-off series remains one of the most beautiful 2D platformers ever made. Not to mention one of the most feverishly difficult games in the Mega Man canon. Maybe not as soul-crushing as the original game, but pretty darn close. Regardless of whether you play as X or Zero, there's a grandness to the story, graphics and music that make Mega Man X4 feel almost cinematic at times. Especially with some of those absolutely gorgeous anime cutscenes. This was the biggest Mega Man game to date, and some might argue the best. Is it your favourite Mega Man? Chrono Cross is a weird sequel to Chrono Trigger, if you even want to call it a sequel at all. Taking place in a very different world with very different characters, the game is really more of a sequel to a Chrono Trigger spin-off. Regardless of its connections to one of the best SNES RPGs of all time, Chrono Cross remains one of the most singular and most ambitious RPGs Square ever developed for the PS1. And given the company's resume, that's saying a lot. Okay, maybe not these days, but you know what we mean. A massive cast of endearing characters, likeable leads, and a quirky sense of humour give Chrono Cross a one-of-a-kind tenacity that's eminently appealing. The gameplay, environment and pacing all point to an amazing development team, and the sort of games that Square, or really any huge studio, doesn't seem to make anymore. It's a little funny that a game with such a focus on travelling through time would be such a timeless RPG classic. If you're a big Chrono Trigger fan that just keeps putting off this game, then there is no time like the present. Some considered the visually sumptuous Tomba to be a little too old-fashioned when it hit the PS1 in 1997, and those people are called fucking idiots. As was the notion that side-scrolling 2D games needed to die so the era of 3D games could live. They wanted us to sacrifice this so things like Bubsy 3D could exist. Dwell on that for a bit. Headed by former Capcom employees, Tomba was a Metroidvania-style game that was clearly labour of love. Tomba deserved its flowers in 1997, well over a year past the release of 3D heavyweights like Super Mario 64. But unfortunately, it didn't do great on the sales side of things. Despite great reviews, the game seemingly didn't appeal to most players in the late 90s. There was enough success for a sequel, but this game about a feral child named Tomba going up against a society of anthropomorphic pigs to get his grandfather's bracelet back ultimately bankrupted developer Whoopee Camp, and that is not a whoopee. What's the opposite of a whoopee? A buoy? Let us know in the comments down below. Between 96 and 98, Naughty Dog gave us one of the greatest video game trilogies of the era. While Crash may have not bested Mario as his early commercials aspired to do, he did help establish PlayStation's identity in a very distinct, entertaining and slightly more edgy way. This guy is wearing jorts. As playable now as they were decades ago, we are cheating a little bit to include all these games in one entry, but eventually they would become known as the Insane Trilogy because they ultimately make up a single playing experience. Each game in this series of challenging, multifaceted platformers is a striking improvement over the last, particularly the leap in between the first and second games. They all still look and sound excellent, and when you play them all at once, the result is something quite special. You can see that these games still have the same punch and charm as they did back in the 90s. And while we're at it, let's chuck in Crash Team Racing. Why not, eh? Long regarded as one of the greatest PS1 JRPGs of all time, Suikoden 2 is a sterling example of how the best PS1 RPGs don't feel like they've aged much, if at all. Suikoden 2 may not have as much visual power as Final Fantasy, but it was a minor complaint in 1998, and it hardly holds water in the present. Suikoden 2 hits where it counts, namely with story, characters, and how extraordinarily easy it is to get lost in those things. Suikoden 2 has a massive cast of recruitable characters, well over 100, and a sense of grandeur and scope that comes through brilliantly in how the epic tale unfolds. The game utilising 3 different modes of combat was a cool novelty in 1998, and is one of the reasons why you'll not get bored of SotN 2 anytime soon. Just maybe look at other ways of playing it unless you're bored of having money, as copies of the game sell for like $250 fairly regularly. Given Konami's stunning range of quality games on the PS1 in the 90s, it's easy to see why some mourn the current state of the publisher, though they are trying to change their image these days, even if they end up botching the current renaissance. At least we have some fantastic classics like the 1999 survival horror classic Silent Hill, to remind us of just how good we had it sometimes back in the heyday of the PS1. Silent Hill was initially compared to Resident Evil, but very quickly established itself as something altogether very different. You generally don't get to blast your way out of danger in this small town hellscape, which begins with you simply searching for your daughter in an extremely creepy unknown place. You have to think. You have to move, you have to pick up the radio from the diner or have a very, very bad time. Silent Hill is still a masterwork in survival horror, even if some of its absolute roughest edges could sharpen Pyramid Head's comically sized sword knife these days. There's just a feel to the early Silent Hill games that's so completely impossible to replicate that also makes the game feel timeless. See what we mean about Konami in their better days? The company was on a remarkable winning streak in the late 90s, with Castlevania Symphony of the Night standing as their finest and most enduring achievement. Castlevania Symphony of the Night was regarded almost immediately by those who played it as one of the most creative and absorbing experiences that you could have on the PlayStation. It's a game steeped in atmosphere that brought serious RPG elements to its fast-paced, difficult sense of action. You have to survive a plethora of horrors just to get to Dracula himself, and along the way you'll have to collect the weapons and magic you'll need to be triumphant. But finishing the game doesn't mean you've actually finished the game. The way Symphony of the Night can surprise you over and over again is why it's unsurpassed for some as one of the best Castlevania games ever, but also quite possibly the best PS1 game ever as well. Even in 2024, it's a symphony we're just going to keep listening to over and over again. But maybe not at this price. Can we perhaps slim the symphony down a little bit? Some a cappella maybe? A nice little scat with the lads? Ski babidi bee ba 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 bididi ba ba boom.
Final Fantasy Tactics. Modern strategy RPGs basically look the same and play with the same principles, says ELR492. Developers are basically making the same game 27 years later. And you know what? He's right. Final Fantasy Tactics may be a series largely forgotten about by Square Enix so they can put more money towards being frankly terrible, but the fact that so many developers today take note from the series speaks volumes for how important it truly is. Establishing Ivalice for the first time, a setting we'd see again in Tactics, and another game that also finds its way into this video. Final Fantasy Tactics follows Ramza as he is thrust into the Lion War, which is much more harrowing and a lot less tasty than you might think. What is tasty though is how the game looks even in 2024. We think you could just keep adding decades on top of Tactics and it simply won't show it. The sprites may be simple in this tactical RPG, but there's a feel to the overall aesthetic, character portraits and music that will make it probably even more timeless than a lot of the full-fat 3D Final Fantasy games. If you want to play more modern games that feel like Final Fantasy Tactics, the indie sphere boasts bangers like Fae Tactics that are undeniably inspired by the series, but Triangle Strategy and Unicorn Overlord also hit a lot of the same notes to great effect. Final Fantasy Tactics itself, though, hasn't been seen on a console since 2007. That's just dumb. That's dumb. If you're of a certain age, and when you get old they say of a certain vintage, you probably remember exactly where you were when Oddworld Abe's Odyssey changed your life forever. Being able to fart on command was the ultimate wish fulfillment for a child back in the day, but watching your little green Abe explode into chunks of meat was an experience so harrowing for me personally that it scared me too much to play it for years. Listen, all I'm saying is going from watching Digimon to watching yourself getting eaten by a wild pack of slug dogs is a lot, okay? We do have to disagree with RJ a little though when he says that both Oddworld games will always be beautiful and enjoyable. As they are beautiful, but there are times when Oddworld is practically begging your undeveloped brain to look up a guide. But it's certainly got a look and ambience to it that will always be almost ageless. In the first game, Odyssey, you play as Abe, a Madokan who discovers that Amazon actually doesn't have his best interests at heart and is turning his mates into chicken Kievs. Madokan Kievs? I don't know. Anyway, you must escape from the farms by chanting, farting, and leaping your way to glory, solving one brutal puzzle after another, even using your powers to take over the bodies of enemy guards in the process. The sequel, Exodus, is much of the same brilliance with a bunch of rough bits tightened up. There are a lot of PS1 games that objectively just look miles better with all kinds of emulation enhancements slapped on, but honestly, for our money, the Oddworld PS1 game should look exactly as mucky and murky as the developers intended. Both of these games have been remade as new and tasty and the sadly kinda overlooked Soulstorm respectively if you really got to see those meat chunks in higher fidelity. Breath of Fire 3 has some of the most beautiful character and enemy sprites from that era, and the low-poly 3D environments also aged very well, claims Kazi, no doubt in between karaoke sessions. He's right, and will do you one better and throw the fourth game in here too. Breath of Fire is a pretty rad series that's really kind of sadly been forgotten about as the years go by, so much so that yoga is now one of the first things that appears when you look it up on Google. The last game in the series, Breath of Fire 6, was an online-only game released for PC and mobile, but only in Japan, thanks for saving us from that, and it lasted for a little less than I can do a downward dog for. It's quite a shame to see how far Breath of Fire fell off, as while it was never a series that lit up the mainstream like Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest, Capcom's RPG still had a ton of fans who thought that yeah, turning into a dragon is actually kind of sick actually. Those fans supported both Breath of Fire 3 and 4 on the PS1, which was the series' first 3D forays after its debut on the SNES. And it's easy to see why they did, as these games remain absolute lookers today, with tons of detail in the characterization of its Animorphs-esque cast, but more in like a charming way than a haunting melted way, with Breath of Fire 4 in particular offering the kind of visuals that had launched 1,000 imitators on Steam. While Breath of Fire 3 received pretty solid PSP and Vita ports, Breath of Fire 4 has never found its way onto another console in the PlayStation ecosystem since its 2000 launch. That's mental. We'll tell you under our breath how you can easily and much less expensively play it today. Jeffrey Rush from 2003 until 2017. While commenters like Otis the 1410 have mentioned a whole bunch of other awesome recommendations in their comments, we've decided to highlight one series in particular that's, to tell you the truth, been bizarrely absent from the channel until now, but here we are, doing everything we can to feel younger in our mind. It's Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. That hangar level, the Neversoft logo, videotapes, more time-based anxiety than a hedgehog running around underwater, Spider-Man. When you think of the PS1, these are all things that are basically inseparable from it for many, as the Tony Hawk series captured the essence of an era like few games ever have, or maybe ever will. While the general gameplay is obviously not as fluid as the recent remakes for more modern consoles, there's a beautiful simplicity to the original Pro Skater games that's transportative to a time when everything wasn't just all evil and grainy and black and white. You've got a spare 10 minutes to finally collect all those letters until Digimon starts, right? Taxes? What are they? Chuck in the greatest collection of licensed soundtracks ever, and there's no arguing with that. I'm pretty sure that, they are the greatest licensed soundtracks ever. The kind of names that simply don't exist today, and What the hell is a Chad Musker? And more secrets than an island full of famous people, and you have a series that feels equally of its time and also timeless. Not Pro Skater 4 though on PS1, because that's terrible there, just play it on PS2. Final Fantasy IX has aged beautifully, writes Bree-chan 1851. To this day it holds up better than the other two, 7 and 8, though they are fine games. We'll agree and disagree with you there, Bree-chan, old boy, as while Final Fantasy IX and 7 have indeed aged like a fine bottle of Tizer, Final Fantasy VIII feels more like it was invented by aliens being fed instructions by Johnny Knoxville as the years go by. It's just a really annoying game. Final Fantasy IX though, man, what a beauty this game was and remains today. Honestly would not have looked out of place at all on something like the Dreamcast. One of my personal favourite memories ever is of receiving this as a surprise from my uncle, booting up and seeing the PlayStation 1 being pushed to its absolute limit in the year 2000, just before the launch of the PS2. And yeah, then it wouldn't take long until Final Fantasy X would come out with a kind of leap that felt beyond evolutionary. You had no idea how far video games could push the envelope back then, and it was just incredibly exciting to look on and let your imagination race. Where did it all go wrong? Final Fantasy IX though, what a gorgeous optimistic game this is, the closest the series has come to a Sunday morning cartoon in a long time. Granted, it does have its dark moments like the whole mother killing thing, crikey, but from top to bottom the cast is a delight, with the game being a love letter to the less edgier, earlier Final Fantasy entries. It's strange to say that a game that sold over 5 million copies is overlooked, but following up Final Fantasy 7 and 8, with most players eagerly awaiting Sony's big black box at the time of release, meant that Final Fantasy 9 didn't quite create as much of a fervour. That's a shame, but here's hoping that long-rumoured remake not only does it justice, but also introduces even more people to Zidane and the gang. Fighting games in the 2020s greatest weapon hasn't been a fireball or a chained kunai or an aggressive post-launch DLC model, but something a bit sweeter. Member berries. Dormant franchises like King of Fighters and even Fatal Fury can come back, but then there are also series like Mortal Kombat that are seemingly entirely powered by nostalgia. Remember the character we just killed off? $5 please. Which makes it even weirder that a series like Bloody Roar could be more or less completely forgotten, especially as they were such fun fighters according to Erica Fish. There's a good bit of anamorphing going on in this list, but Bloody Roar arguably has the coolest application of it. Can you imagine how wild it would be to hear about a game on the playground in which you can kick people's heads in as a rabbit? Bloody Roar may not be the most complex fighting game today, but Bloody Roar 2 in particular has some truly excellent animations for the time that are right up there with the best in Tekken, particularly when it comes to the transformations. The story is also somehow even more batshit than Tekken, with Foxmen accidentally killing their own mothers, gorilla homies joining the circus, and Taifu. Again, society had a big Tiger Men thing going on for a while though. Both of the Bloody Roar PS1 games look and feel great today, but the series actually had a further 3 installments after this which didn't quite capture that same feeling, including one that released originally just on GameCube and admittedly looked bloody lovely. Sadly though, Bloody Roar as an IP has been hibernating since 2004, 56 years ago, which is crazy. We've mentioned this before, but the perfect spokesperson is right there for a reboot. He's right there, you could do a DLC and everything. Come on. Cut the PS1 and it will probably bleed a forgotten RPG series, or 20. It truly was a golden age for the genre, with arguably not even the PS2 having so many heavy hitters so often. This obviously means though that a few of them will fall into the cracks and get lost to time, but Shawsey thinks that Valkyrie Profile is timeless. Yeah, we can't argue with that. Whether it's the version on PS1 or Lenneth on PSP, there's some ageless quality to the original Valkyrie Profile that follow-up games in the series have always been chasing without quite as much success here in the West, but Silmeria on PS2 is also absolutely worth checking out. In the OG, you play as Lenneth, a Valkyrie who, travelling through Midgard, no, not Midgar, as she looks to collect souls to enlist as Einherjar to help against the upcoming Ragnarok, which does the opposite of rock. Actually, it kinda sucks. Think of Valkyrie Profile as a little bit Final Fantasy, a little bit folklore, and even a smidgen of Spiritfarer, which is an absolute ripper of a game, by the way, as Lenneth looks to piece her past life together again. Spiritfarer and that tiny hedgehog woman. God, that messed me up. That messed me up good. Valkyrie Profile looks dreamy with gorgeously animated sprites, has more depth to it than hell itself, and boasts a story that is surprisingly heartrending. If you need to sell your soul to grab it physically, consider getting its recent PS4 and PS5 port digitally instead. The series also saw Valkyrie Elysium in 2022, which kinda played like a dull version of Astral Chain, and yeah, now we will probably never see the series again. Shame. Listen, this really isn't us this time. Honest, we bring the game up a lot on this channel, but Vagrant Story's place here is Nate W's democratic right as a bird friend. Just like Final Fantasy IX, Vagrant Story came out at a time when it was clear that Square was using every single ounce of power that the early 90s tech in the PS1 could provide them as we moved into the new millennium. Think of it like this: tech that came out in 1994, the same year as Tammy and the T-Rex, was able to astound players into the next decade. And despite the obviously wibbly-wobbly textures here and there, which really is a hallmark of the PS1, Vagrant Story still holds up magnificently nearly 25 years on. There's nothing quite like this action RPG dungeon crawler even today, with players assuming control of Ashley Riot as he pursues a cult leader in Leia Monday. You think Vagrant Story is going to be a particular kind of game, and then it flips the script with some frankly stunning cinematography that'd make Kojima proud. Speaking of Kojima, did you know that the game is actually intended to serve as a prequel by the name of The Phantom Pain, with a sequel never coming out? Vagrant Story has also never been given a proper remaster in almost 25 years and has never left PlayStation. While the game is timeless, it really is time that some younger people found that out for themselves too. There aren't many game series as weird and genre-hopping as Legacy of Kain. From top-down to third-person to MMO, Legacy of Kain did a lot for a long time and then did absolutely nothing for even longer. That's beyond a crying shame, as everyone who played Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver when they were young before immediately getting lost can attest that there's a feel to these games that simply cannot be replicated today. Maybe it's just me though, but did anyone else get a similar feeling from Returnal? The vibes? Let me know down below. The Legacy of Kain games were dark and edgy, but never try-hard. Maybe that's thanks to the theatre actors giving it their all in the lead roles. The normal kids had Buffy the Vampire Slayer for their vampire fix, the Freakazoids had the Legacy of Kain. While commenter True Hair reckons Blood Omen is also worth some recognition for standing the test of time, we've got to go with Soul Reaver here, just for the dark, twisted essence of the counterculture of the 90s that it was trying to capture. It doesn't get much less mainstream than playing as a de-winged, betrayed vampire without a jaw seeking revenge by eating one soul at a time while travelling between realms with atmosphere so thick that we're pretty sure Evanescence wouldn't exist without it. Granted, Soul Reaver is undoubtedly a bit of a pain in the neck to figure out where exactly you are and what it is you have to do, like a Zelda game for misanthropes, but there's far too much cool stuff going on underneath Soul Reaver for it to not at least be worth a look. Most surprisingly, you will even be able to give it a look on the Evercade soon of all things alongside Blood Omen. It's a start, we guess? I think the biggest compliment you can give the OG Klonoa is that it received a pretty good remake that didn't really need to exist. Okay, maybe it needed to give people options that weren't setting their money on fire. It also received a Wii remake that a lot of people have forgotten about, so it's clear that Namco and Hideo Yoshizawa were onto something way back in 1997, and something that they were right to be proud of. We also must apologise to the Diamond Sea for making them sad way back in our original video. But we unfortunately aren't the only people to overlook Klonoa, as despite sequel after sequel, remake after remake, weird spin-off after weird spin-off, Klonoa has just never managed to get anywhere near the likes of Crash, Spyro, or even Croc or Gex, haha funny meme, in terms of mainstream recognition. Honestly, we have no idea why, because Door to Phantomile is a beautiful game that brilliantly blends 2D and 3D with accessible gameplay that's like a nice warm mug of Tizer. Maybe the game and series in general is just too sweet? I mean, it came out at a time when fashion criminals were the coolest characters in video games, so a nice cat boy who lives in a world powered by dreams maybe just couldn't compete with jorts. Denim terrorism shouldn't diminish Klonoa at all though, as this side-scroller still has plenty of charm even in 2024. And while the game is largely cutesy, Klonoa does have a couple of brutal emotional moments that might be better learning experiences for children about the provisional nature of life than getting them a puppy. Does Baby Shark teach them that everything dies in the end? We don't think so, and that's why Klonoa stays winning. It's a stick, by the way. What's brown and sticky? Stick. As soon as they had access to 3D, a lot of game developers immediately came to the conclusion that more polygons equals more realism, a philosophy that's aged about as well as basically the entirety of Shallow Hal. It's why a lot of the 3D games released for the N64 look like absolute arse now, as they were chasing an aesthetic that only looked as good as the technology of the time would allow. Meanwhile, a lot of the 2D games, or games that went for vibrancy and imagination first over realism, have aged a lot better by comparison. Just look at Paper Mario in comparison to some trash like Superman 64 and you'll see what we mean, as the graphics for Paper Mario look just as good now as they did at the start of the millennium. And that's the only thing holding Superman 64 back from true greatness, of course. Admittedly, the premise of Paper Mario is about as Mario as it gets, with Peach being kidnapped by Bowser and Mario having to travel to the Mushroom Kingdom to rescue her. The difference here is that instead of jumping on Bowser's head 3 times and calling it a day, Bowser has become invincible by stealing the power of the 7 Star Spirits, defeating Mario in the process. You'll have to find some friends, travel to some weird swamp with some lazy ass little dude, restore the Star Spirits, and give Bowser the kickin' he deserves. Again, the graphics and presentation here are as timeless as it gets, but the gameplay has also aged extremely well, with the action command prompts becoming a core part of a lot of turn-based RPGs. You can also obviously argue for Super Mario 64 here, and that's completely fine with us, even if the controls sometimes make us just wanna... The Nintendo 64 was the company's first proper foray into the brave new world that was the third dimension. So naturally there have been plenty of games on the N64 that haven't really aged well. If we're being honest, we'd probably say that about the graphics for nearly every early 3D game ever, because what's going on here?
What am I looking at?
Despite any missteps, those games that did manage to stick the landing have become timeless classics, and one game that deserves its place among them is Pilot Wings 64. Now, did we make a stick the landing joke because this game is all about helicopters and jetpacks? No. Ostensibly a tech demo for the N64 to showcase what the controller's analog stick was capable of, along with the graphics that the N64 could produce, Pilot Wing 64's premise saw players basically having a bunch of adventure days on some tropical islands. Players could utilise three main forms of transport, those being hang glider, rocket belt, which was a jetpack, and a gyrocopter, and could either complete a series of events to earn licenses or explore the island at their own pace. There were even mini-games which included skydiving and the human cannonball. It's not an overly complex game, but titles like Riders Republic, with its multiple aerial vehicle disciplines and focus on exploration, feel like a continuation of what Pilot Wing 64 was striving towards, only with 200% more cringy attempts at youth lingo.
Yeah, they're a bunch of buck-nutty riders who host regular challenges. You should twaggle in their madness at some point because their events are off the hook and they offer very tidy reward.
Bro has zero riz, baby Gronk. After an incredibly popular anime, a trading card game that caused many a playground civil war, Dan Jacobs, may you never know peace for stealing my Magneton, you rat, and the iconic Pokemon Red, Blue and Yellow, and also stayed here for the N64, it was time for Nintendo and the Pokemon Company to see how versatile their fledgling franchise truly was. Pokemon Snap was that first experiment in a spin-off, and it's widely considered to be one of the best non-mainline Pokemon games ever made. Not bad for a game that's essentially an on-rails photo up, but that simplicity has helped Pokemon Snap to become a truly timeless N64 classic. There is such a thing as over-egging the pudding after all, but Pokemon Snap is just as fun and accessible now as it was back in the year 2000. Instead of capturing Pokemon and forcing them to fight to the death with hammers, Mr. Mime has a lot of blood on his hands, Pokemon Snap follows the aptly named Todd Snap, who's summoned by Professor Oak to come visit Pokemon Island and help with his scientific research. You'll do that by riding an amphibious buggy around various on-rail tracks, snapping pictures of Pokemon in their natural habitat. As you make the rounds, you'll unlock new routes and new accessories that can help unlock secret areas or new Pokemon to picture, adding to the game's replay value immensely. While it took Nintendo 20 years to pull it out of their bag of tricks, they did make a sequel, New Pokemon Snap, for the Switch, which essentially has the same gameplay structure, only with prettier graphics. If that doesn't scream timeless game design, I don't know what does. From one rail shooter to another, except this one doesn't have muck with a Glock, Star Fox 64 is one of the earlier games from the N64's lifespan, yet boasts graphics and gameplay that have managed to stand the test of time. Despite Fox McCloud seemingly standing alongside Captain Falcon as Nintendo mascots that only make appearances when Super Smash Bros. Comes around, playing Star Fox 64 in modern day is still just as enjoyable. Hell, it stands to reason that the game's action and combat is still accessible when the remake for the Nintendo 3DS is basically just the same gameplay with the addition of gyroscopic aiming, while Star Fox Zero tried to change too much and ended up catching some flack. Star Fox 64 sees player controlling Fox and the gang as they continue their long-running feud with the mad scientist Andros, moving from planet to planet, defeating his armies and henchmen along the way. While you moved through most levels on rails, you could move your R-Wing around the screen to shoot down hostiles, though some levels gave players full 3D movement too, which helped keep the action fresh. It's not the most complicated game ever, but one interesting fact about Star Fox 64 is that it's the first N64 game to support the Rumble Pack, which is a feature that comes as standard now on all controllers. Clearly, Star Fox 64 has aged well by showcasing how added rumble vibrations can make gaming even more immersive. Here's a little tidbit for you. One of my friends' mothers growing up banned him from using a controller with rumble because she thought it would give him Parkinson's. Yeah, she was a real ogre. Real-time strategy games and consoles often go as well together as a McFlurry machine and not being broken, which is to say, they don't really. Most RTS games run into massive difficulty trying to adapt the control scheme of a mouse and keyboard to a controller, so when a strategy game manages to nail it, people tend to notice. That's pretty much what happened when Ogre Battle 64, person of a lordly caliber, launched in Japan and America, and it probably would have happened in the PAL regions too if it launched here, but clearly our caliber wasn't lordly enough. We invented lords. Anyway, the third game in the Ogre Battle series, Ogre Battle 64, continues the RTS gameplay of the first game, albeit with better graphics and sprites along with a new world, story and characters, and it's one of the best RPGs on the N64. You control Magnus, a captain in Palatinus' southern region of Alba who finds himself dragged into the country's civil war. Joining with the Revolutionary Army and its leader Frederick, you'll travel through the kingdom of Palatinus, liberating regions as you go while recruiting new troops for your army. These troops can have one of several classes and are split into units of up to 5, which can be commanded as you see fit during the game's RTS battles. The overall formula has been proven to be timeless based on the fact that Vanillaware's Unicorn Overlord is essentially an unashamed love letter to Ogre Battle and the tactics RPG genre as a whole, and it's one of the best games of 2024. If you loved Unicorn Overlord and wanted to experience where those ideas and mechanics began, play Ogre Battle 64. Another one for the Cultured Vulture soundboard that no one is making. We're pretty big fans of the Aki Engine wrestling games here. The Mad Lads managed to release 6 wrestling games on the N64 that represented nearly every major wrestling promotion around in the 90s. Poor ECW had to make do with Acclaim Entertainment, sadly. Still not the worst thing that happened to them though. Anyway, while there's a lot of love online for Virtual Pro Wrestling 2, which focused on Japanese wrestling and even included mechanics to accommodate for the MMA shoot fighting promotions that were around at the time, like Pride FC, most would tend to agree that WWF No Mercy was Aki at their absolute best on the N64. WWF No Mercy offers anything you could want from a wrestling game, with a decent variety of match types, a large roster of wrestlers, simple controls, and a create a wrestler mode that allows you to forge your own freaks from scratch, or recreate real life wrestlers using the tools provided, which Aki practically encouraged and has since become a tradition of all wrestling games. Throw in a decent career mode and it's no wonder that WWF No Mercy has become the measuring stick by which all wrestling games are compared. To be clear though, it's mainly the gameplay that's aged well, as nowadays some of the graphics look as bad as Val Venus's Soul. Future Dark Side of the Ring subject, meet the Dark Side of the Force. Earlier on, we spoke about some games trying to do too much with 3D and flopping because of it. Star Wars Shadows of the Empire is one of those games, trying to be a hybrid between a third-person shooter and an action platformer without managing to be that great at either, though it does have its fans. However, another Star Wars game would drop a year later that would blow Shadows of the Empire out of the water: Rogue Squadron. While many like to say that Shadows of the Empire helped to inspire Rogue Squadron, the truth of the matter is that developers Factor 5 had been working on the idea of Rogue Squadron for about a year prior, with LucasArts project lead Mark Hay Hutchinson using what he learned from developing the speeder bike levels for Shadows to create something more accessible in Rogue Squadron. Star Wars Rogue Squadron is a 3D flight action game that's still incredible to play today. No messy on-foot sections or ridiculous shenanigans, because they saved those for the third Rogue Squadron game apparently, just a great Star Wars themed dogfighting game. Players control Luke Skywalker in the time between the first 2 movies as you take the fight to the Empire across various planets. While the core gameplay hasn't aged a day since the game's release in 1998, Star Wars Rogue Squadron earns bonus vintage points from us considering it featured a clone of Palpatine 2 decades before The Rise of Skywalker did, as the last level ties into the Dark Empire comic book run. The more you know, etc, etc. You may know we like this next game too, we've talked about it once or twice. Alright, listen, look. This is the last time we, or our children, or our children's children will mention F-Zero. For 3 weeks. At one time, F-Zero was Nintendo's premier racing game franchise, but it would seem that Mario Kart has fully taken that spot now. We'd call that a shame, but one look at the track design for Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, specifically its anti-gravity settings, and you'll see that a lot of the design and influence of F-Zero is on full display. There's even a Mute City track, which in our eyes just proves how timeless the whole F-Zero series truly is, but F-Zero X in particular deserves a lot of praise for how well it's aged. For starters, the fact that the game can handle 30 races on the track at any one time while still being a relatively smooth experience, especially compared to other N64 games, is very impressive. Granted, sacrifices had to be made in order to make the performance as impressive as it is, with the graphics in particular being regarded as some of the worst on the console at the time. I mean, that's harsh. Ignore some aged visuals though, and the core gameplay here is exceptional, even if it'll take you a few hours to master its subtleties. Other parts of F-Zero X that have aged incredibly well here are the excellent soundtrack, the ability to tune your vehicle ahead of each race depending on how complex the track is, and the whole concept of the X Cup, which fortunately isn't a competition to placate Elon Musk's ego. The X Cup doesn't feature pre-made tracks, instead letting players loose on tracks that have been randomly generated by the game, and given how procedural generation has become a big part of game design these days, F-Zero X was way ahead of its time. Yeah, like, duh? Yeah, look, we'd love to just write "it's a masterpiece" and then move on, because that's what The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time is. Yes, it does include the water temple, and yes, water levels are bad and stinky, but The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time is the highest rated game of all time on Metacritic for a good reason. It's a whipper. From controls to level design, music and story, every single part of The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time is firing on all cylinders, and while some might prefer the more experimental and strange follow-up Majora's Mask, Ocarina of Time's sheer majesty has ensured that this game will never have to worry about the passage of time. Okay, maybe, yeah right, okay, so yeah, maybe the graphics have seen better days, but Ocarina of Time's visuals flawlessly convey the game's atmosphere and tone. Future Hyrule is scarier than a lot of modern horror games, just saying. Like all good Zelda games, Ocarina of Time follows Link as he travels across Hyrule with the hopes of facing off against the evil Ganondorf so he can save Zelda and the kingdom. Ocarina of Time was the first Zelda game with 3D graphics, and somehow Nintendo managed to nail it from day one, with the developers brilliantly translating the dungeon diving and puzzle solving that forms the majority of Zelda's gameplay into 3D. Throw in one of the world's greatest fishing games and you've got a 3D action-adventure game that deserves to be referred to as the best video game of all time. You can, of course, throw in Majora's Mask here as well, and we wouldn't mind at all. Go on, make it a party. This is foreshadowing. The only real differences between Mario Party 1, 2 and the third one is the minigames and the boards, so we've lumped them all together for this entry because quite frankly all of them have aged pretty well. You want proof? Just look at Mario Party Superstars for the Nintendo Switch, which brought back 5 different boards from across the N64 Mario Party trilogy, along with minigames from the first 8 games, and they're still just as fun now as they were in the 90s. While Mario Party has dabbled with its formula and mechanics in the past, the core has always remained the same. Use dice to move around a board while screwing over your mates at every possible opportunity. That mantra started with the Mario Party N64 trilogy and it'll be there forever. The already mentioned boards that appeared in Mario Party Superstars showcase Mario Party at its best / most rage-inducing, depending on which end of the luck you're getting. If you just want the Mario Party game that's aged the best though on N64, stick with Mario Party 2 and 3, as Mario Party 2 introduced mechanics that have become a core part of the overall experience, including certain minigame types and the ability to practice minigames before playing them. It kind of feels like cheating to talk about Super Mario 64 as an N64 game that holds up because, yeah, of course, one of the most beloved platformers of all time is still great fun to play now as it was back in the 90s. The Italian plumber's first foray into the world of 3D, Super Mario 64 on paper is the same game that it always was as you try to rescue Princess Peach from her kidnapper, the evil Bowser. However, the structure and level design, from the hub world of Peach's castle to the various worlds you can visit within the castle, along with the secrets that can be found in every nook and cranny, help create a new kind of platforming adventure that games today are still taking notes from. It's not hyperbole to say that's an entire genre of games owe their success to Super Mario 64 in one way or another. Sure, the graphics might make younger players who are used to seeing Kratos' nose hair in 4K wince a little, and the camera takes a bit of getting used to compared to the cameras that modern 3D platformers are blessed with, but the sheer popularity of Super Mario 64 in today's landscape as a speedrunning or challenge run game just proves how well the mechanics and gameplay have held up over the past 2.5 decades. Even Nintendo knew how well Super Mario 64 holds up when they bundled it with Super Mario Sunshine and Super Mario Galaxy as part of the 3D All-Stars collection on the Switch with barely any upgrades, and it still manages to be one of the best platformers on the platform. That's definitely why they didn't make any big changes, and not just because they couldn't be arsed. Definitely. Is it a stretch to call this the greatest of all time? It is pretty smashing. Quick random aside that I didn't actually know until I made that stupid joke and looked up afterwards. Did you know, right, that Nigel Thornberry was in this Smash clone? Like, what's next? David Attenborough in Tekken? Actually, you know what? When Masahiro Sakurai came up with the idea of having a bunch of Nintendo mascots scrapped back in 1998, he probably didn't realise that one day Solid Snake would be able to beat Mewtwo to death. Now, looking back on the first Super Smash Bros, you can plainly see how far the series has progressed. Melee, the GameCube follow-up, was a leaps and bounds improvement over the first game with almost double the roster and plenty of new modes, while Brawl's Subspace Emissary mode and ultimate sheer amount of content have kept the series feeling fresh and exciting throughout the years. Still, the original N64 game still holds up today as a true icon and innovator of the platform fighting genre. While the first Super Smash Bros. Might be a bit more sluggish in comparison to Melee, you're still engaging in the same fun, party-oriented gameplay that the series has become renowned for. Nintendo and HAL nailed the core formula on the first go-around and have basically spent the rest of the series innovating and reiterating on that same core formula. When looking back at some older games in some franchises, you can be amazed by how different they are or how much the series has changed over the years, but let someone play Super Smash Bros. For the N64 and they'll probably be in their element. By that metric, it absolutely holds up. Maybe not as much as Melee, of course, but people will still be taking their GameCube controllers to conventions when Pluto finally takes its revenge and crashes into Earth. Go on, Pluto, mate, you go. Don't let us tell you what you are. You wouldn't have been endangered in that Bruce Willis movie, would you? Pretty much everyone who's got at least a passing interest in gaming or is like over 25 has likely played a round of Worms at one point. After becoming a huge success on the PC and Amiga with the first couple of games, Worms Armageddon helped to take the turn-based highly destructible combat to new heights, introducing a whole new audience to the glory that is Worms. Scouser voice pack for life. What makes Worms Armageddon a game that's aged incredibly well is how much Team 17 and the Worms developers have tried to innovate or change the Worms franchise in the years since, and how most of those attempts have fallen flat on their arse. Whether it's the series' brief dalliance with 3D, adding enterable buildings to the mix with Worms Forts, the introduction of classes in Worms Revolution, or the inclusion of vehicles in Worms WMD, very few subsequent games have had the same magic and source as the original Worms Armageddon, and the less said about Worms Rumble, the better. Worms Armageddon is blessed with an almost timeless simplicity, and Team 17 should probably strip the series back down to basics and stop trying to make Worms something it doesn't need to be. Maybe keep the cool water effects though, I like them. If you want to talk about developers that had a chokehold on the N64, it's hard to not talk about the guys over at Rare. After killing it on the SNES with Donkey Kong Country, Rare started knocking it out of the park on the N64 with the likes of GoldenEye, Perfect Dark, Blast Corps, and Killer Instinct Gold. You could make the argument that nearly every Rare N64 game has held up pretty well, but as far as we're concerned, very few of them have managed to hold a candle to Banjo-Kazooie. Critics at the time were calling Banjo-Kazooie an even greater game than even Super Mario 64, and while we're not going to wade into that debate, we will remind everyone that Super Mario 64 doesn't have the mad yapping bastard that is Gruntilda. Following the same formula as Super Mario 64 of go to vibrant world, find things to unlock more worlds, Banjo-Kazooie built off the foundations laid by Super Mario 64 by encouraging even more non-linear progression when collecting items. It also offers larger worlds to explore and even includes more NPCs to interact with. And while Mario had his charm, Banjo-Kazooie dialed the humour and tone up to 11, making for an incredibly memorable and fun experience during both gameplay and the various cutscenes. Add in the incredible soundtrack work from Grant Kirkhope, and it's no wonder that Banjo-Kazooie is one of the most beloved platformers ever made. Also, it's a twofer. A two-ether, because we're including Banjo-Tooie in this as well, and that game is also fantastic. No, we don't make this up as we go along. As mentioned in the intro, the graphics of a lot of N64 games have given the console and its library a reputation of aging a bit poorly. While the 3D rendering was impressive at the time, these days the games can look a bit lawnmower man sometimes, especially when they're being upscaled via emulators or whatever other means. Because of this, there's a selection of N64 games which remain 2D, which now look like they've been preserved by the gods themselves, Mischief Makers being one of them. Now, to call Mischief Makers strictly 2D would be a lie, as it utilises 3D backgrounds and pre-rendered 3D models for the characters, similar kinda to how Donkey Kong Country worked on the SNES, only Mischief Makers adds a lot more colour and wacky visuals into the mix. It is a treasure game, after all. Set on the planet Clancer, you control a robotic maid by the name of Marina, or Ultra Intergalactic Cybot G Marina Lightyears if you feel like dropping her full government name, as she sets out to rescue her creator, Professor Theo, from the clutches of the planet's emperor and the brainwashed masses. In order to do so, you'll be shaking your way through the game's 50 plus levels, and we mean that literally. Marina can grab and shake pretty much everything in a level, with different items having different properties and effects. The fact you can grab nearly everything is a level of freedom platformers still struggle to offer, and it helps make Mischief Makers stand out as a truly underrated N64 classic, and yet another treasure banger that deserves better. Okay, this might be a controversial pick considering how widely beloved Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 was and still is. It is and will always be a whipper, cartridge crushed, gorilla radio and all, but arguably hasn't aged the best out of all of the Holy Trilogy for one reason and one reason alone: the revert. Introduced in Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3, the revert allowed players to continue their combos reliably after landing from a quarter pipe. These days, the revert is almost taken for granted as an expected part of the moveset, but it took until the third game to appear and has been integral ever since. The recent remakes of the first two games, actually including the revert that was from the third game, shows how important it had become to the formula. Alongside the revert, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 also introduced hidden tricks like the double kickflip, which gave players more options to flesh out and extend their combos. Again, that feature would become integral going forward, proving how much the ideas and gameplay of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 hold up. For instance, take someone who's only played Pro Skater 4 and onwards, throw them into the first two games, and they might struggle because of the lack of options, but Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 would make for a less painful transition. Now, is the N64 version the best version available? Not really, especially when the game also released on the PS2, Xbox and GameCube, but it still offers that timeless gameplay you knew from a young age was something pretty special. Also, this was the final N64 game to come out for North America, so yeah, pretty good way to go out. Trying to launch a kart racing game a year after the release of Mario Kart 64, one of the best multiplayer games ever made, might seem like a fool's errand on paper, but as the years have passed and your cartilage has evaporated, Rare's Diddy Kong Racing has been vindicated as the N64 racer that truly holds up. Like Mario Kart 64, you're racing around a bunch of tracks, picking up items to gain speed or to mess up your various opponents, which includes the video game debuts of both Banjo from Banjo-Kazooie and Conker from, well, the Conker games, but it's not in the what but the how where Diddy Kong Racing deserves its flowers. Firstly, Diddy Kong Racing introduced the adventure mode, where players travel between worlds competing in races, battles and boss fights in order to defeat an intergalactic villain. A formula that Naughty Dog would borrow pretty liberally from in order to create the adored Crash Team Racing. However, the real innovation comes with the fact that players could choose to utilize a kart, hovercraft, or plane, each offering its own advantages and disadvantages in the race. Being able to choose your loadout, so to speak, is something that Mario Kart adopted moving forward, while the different disciplines are similar to Sonic and Sega All-Star Racing Transformed, which swap between cars, boats and planes during the race to keep things interesting. Remember everyone, that thing you love about kart racing games? Well, Diddy did do it. First. Wait a minute. We've already spoken about how shooting for 2.5D graphics during the N64 era proved to be an anti-aging elixir for a lot of games, but perhaps no game benefited from this more than Yoshi's Story. While critics found plenty to enjoy during their time with Yoshi's Story, the game was punished seemingly for the crime of not being exactly like Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island. There were other negative points too, like the game's short length or lack of any real difficulty, and they're absolutely right in those regards, but one other thing that everyone can agree on is that the game's graphics and aesthetic are some of the best on the entire console, and help Yoshi's Story stand shoulder to shoulder with more modern platformers. The story sees Baby Bowser turning the entirety of Yoshi's Island into a pop-up storybook. Naturally, the graphics reflect this change to a paper-based world, which utilizes pre-rendered 3D and color in a way to create a world unlike anything else on the console at the time. Even now, the graphics look infinitely more appealing than most other N64 games you can think of, and the decision to have the game set in a pop-up storybook has informed the style of Yoshi's games going forward. Both Woolly World and Crafted World have played with materials to create unique visual aesthetics that stand apart from the rest of the Mario franchise, and we love that for them. But we're still waiting for an answer on our Yoshi's Velcro World pitch though, or Yoshi's AstroTurf World. If Astrobot had a game with a younger version of him like Yoshi's Island, you could call it AstroTot. Something to mull over, people with all the money. Wet Tricks might sound like a new breakfast cereal with a dolphin mascot or some kind of designer weight loss drug, but it's actually a puzzle game that blends Tetris with water. Yeah, Wet Tricks is a bit of a weird one, though its contributions to the world of puzzle games can't be understated. Instead of just simply cloning Tetris, Puyo Puyo, Columns, I love Columns. I love Columns, or some other puzzle game, Wet Tricks creates something new that hasn't been attempted since, aside from the PS2 sequel at least. That is some incredible box art, frame it. Basically, in Wet Tricks, your goal is to try and store water on an isometric 3D landscape, with the game ending if too much water falls off and fills up the gauge at the bottom of the screen. Sounds simple enough, right? Wrong! Wet Tricks chucks a host of items, gimmicks and tricks at you to keep you on your toes, from Tetris-shaped blocks that allow you to shape the landscape in ways that might help or hinder you. These come in both upper and downer variety, giving you a lot to think about already, which is naturally when the game starts throwing fireballs, ice cubes, mines and earthquakes your way, ensuring that it's never a dull moment in the weird world of Wet Tricks. There's another Kadikarus video for you. With a decent range of modes and impressive graphics for a puzzle game, Wet Tricks could easily be considered among the hidden gems of the N64, but there's no doubt about the fact that it definitely holds up. Just don't come complaining to me if you play it and find it too hard. Wet Tricks isn't for you if you're a bit wet behind the ears. You know what else is wet? Milk. I know what milk comes from? A cow. Harvest Moon 64 is the next one. Yeah. The original creators of the Story of Seasons series, which was first known as Harvest Moon, and I'm not getting into that whole thing here, must feel like they were less than al-Gaib when games like Stardew Valley, Rune Factory and My Time at Portia started popping off out of nowhere. Pretty much the originators of the farming life sim genre, the first Harvest Moon games serve as the basis from which most games in that genre are born, with Harvest Moon 64 perhaps being the first in series that most accurately translates to its more modern counterparts. While the graphics and isometric camera might not be for everyone these days, the core gameplay loop still holds up to this day. You've been left an abandoned farm by your grandfather, and you've decided to make it your personal mission to build the farm back up again, planting crops and looking after animals as you go. Along with the farm, you'll mingle with the locals in the nearby village, perhaps even start a relationship with one of them. Harvest Moon 64 also added the idea of stamina and time to the formula, limiting the amount you can actually get done in one day, which wasn't present in previous games and has become a core part of other farming sims. I mean, it's crazy to play Stardew Valley and realise, wow, this is literally just Harvest Moon if the people making them weren't insane. The amount of games that have sung from the same hymn sheet as Harvest Moon 64 basically proves how the game has held up over the years, even if only in terms of formula. Now, the Skies of Arcadia hive may not be the biggest hive ever, but I might have just activated them. Run. The Dreamcast is absolutely loaded with games that never quite got their due, just like the console itself. Obviously, being tied to a console that burned very brightly and then faded as the PlayStation 2 began to make its mark is a key reason for that, but Skies of Arcadia is a game that, no matter how many 8-hour-long retrospectives are released, you just feel like it's never going to properly get its flowers. And that is a crying shame, because even in the 2020s, Overworks' overlooked RPG can still make you smile from basically the main menu. Following Vise, a young sky pirate backed up by Fina and Ica, Skies of Arcadia is a bright, jaunty turn-based RPG in which you try to stop an evil empire from doing evil empire stuff. What that means for you is building up your crew and exploring the pretty beefy overworld, with players able to traverse dungeons and all those classic RPG staples. Where Skies of Arcadia really excels though is in just its absolutely infectious sense of wonder and adventure, which is helped by its banger soundtrack that honestly chills, mate, straight up chills. The game's charming character is put over further by one of the most likeable supporting casts ever seen in the genre, and that includes just the random sailor jabronis who join you. No expense was spared on making this one of the Dreamcast's most detailed, vibrant games, with so much to see and do that it honestly puts a lot of its modern peers to shame. It did get a pretty great GameCube port that also didn't sell great, like, at all, so we really are overdue for a port from someone, somewhere, somehow. Yeah, I know I'm crazy.
Alright, let's get it on! Hey, it's time to make some crazy money. Are you ready? Here we go!
Listen, right, look, Crazy Taxi is a game I could feasibly play for the rest of my life at least like once a week. In fact, I even have this game on my phone and play it whenever I'm in a waiting room or there's no internet somewhere. I have no problem being on my phone for hours and hours once that offspring kicks in. Crazy Taxi didn't predict the future of gaming, or it didn't do my taxes or anything like that. No, the thing about Crazy Taxi that's aged so beautifully is just how pretty much anyone can pick up and play it, maybe even plagiarize it a little, and immediately find themselves dropping everything else for minutes or hours at a time. Well, what do you do in Crazy Taxi? It's simple. You drive, you stop, people get in your car, you drive, you stop, they get out, and repeat. Completely, fair quickly, and you get extra time and money, which in turn helps you to improve your record, and that's about it. The Crazy Box is also a collection of fun, goofy minigames that can give you a couple extra hours of fun, but really the best thing about Crazy Taxi is that it has very little fat, really, you know? It's no nonsense arcade brilliance that activates your monkey brain, and I love that about it. Really, the only thing that hasn't aged that well about Crazy Taxi are all of the pretty damn on-the-nose product placements, but it's still kind of fun to marvel at the brands of yesteryear and see how things have changed since. It's a new age, after all. Recently ported after years in the wilderness to remind everyone that Justin Wong may actually have been brewed by Skynet, Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is that rare, incredible fighting game that's as shallow as a puddle if you want to mess around with friends, or deeper than the best bit in the Aquaman movie if you want to get competitive. Just about the best arcade conversion of all time, NVC2's incredible hand-drawn sprites honestly would look brilliant in any year for probably the next 25 years or more, with some crazy fluid 60fps animations and anime-ass transitions, meaning your eyes barely ever get a rest. It's a visual tour de force, and while it's obvious that hand-drawn stuff takes a lot of work, it's strange how so few other fighting games have tried a similar style since the success of Cuphead. It just makes games timeless, you know? Then there's the roster, which due to horrible licensing bollocks and the consolidation of art under one probably definitely evil umbrella, will never get the likes of which again. Or we will, but in like 7 different DLC packs with, I don't know, my guy Amingo as a pre-order bonus. Don't hold my boy back like that, you cannot be tamed. As for how the game plays, well, I'm not your boy if you're looking for someone to go deep into switch glitches, punish assists, push blocks and end starters. Only one of those is not real, by the way. Let me know down below which one and you could win a Steam key. However, Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is a vivid, engaging fighting game that's easy to pick up but difficult to master, with a banger soundtrack that will take you for a ride. Just try not to awaken the beast. Now, if you've been watching this channel for a while, you're probably thinking that I've just put this here in this specific spot so that I can have a very blatant needle drop for that song. No, that's just not true though, is it? It's not true. However, as well as having an absolute whipper of a soundtrack, Daytona USA 2001 stands the test of time damn well for a lot of the same reasons that something like Crazy Taxi does. It's pretty simple fun. The fact that it is now playable online in PAL regions, as long as you import the NTSC disc after all these years, is just a bonus. While it's a very easy game to pick up and get something out of, Daytona on Dreamcast does have a bit of hidden depth beyond its arcadey goodness, as you're going to need to practice to nail those corners to the point where you'll begin to see palm trees in your dreams. So yeah, admittedly the controls on the Dreamcast will take a bit of getting used to or fiddling with, as they're pretty slippy, so if you happen to have a Dreamcast steering wheel lying around, you're going to want to dust it off. However, it looks beautiful and runs great at 60 frames per second, boasts a nice selection of cures and tracks, and again just has immaculate vibes that no amount of controlled bugbears can take away anything from. You might want to put Sega Rally or Metropolis Street Racer in here instead, and you can do that, that's totally fine, but for me, something about Daytona just hits different, and I would kill for more fat-free racing fun like this today. While Grandia 2 might live a little in the charming shadow of the original Grandia game, well, at least it's not as overshadowed as Grandia 3. First released on the Dreamcast before later getting a PlayStation 2 port that itself has not aged well at all, many of the original staff returned to work on Grandia 2's tale of a world that's seemingly on the up after an ancient battle between the gods nearly destroyed it, and a church that isn't quite what it appears. a turn-based RPG in which you play as Ryudo, a mercenary who is entrusted to safeguard a songstress. Grandia 2 is far darker than the jauntier original, with you able to avoid enemies rather than constantly encountering them randomly, which is kinda a blessing for a 3D RPG when even Final Fantasy X still had random encounters a year later. The general pace of the turn-based battles is helped a lot by the ATB system, which actually lets you interrupt enemy attacks with good timing, so you aren't just sitting back and letting the AI take it in turns to wail on you. Add in some charming dinner conversations with your party that will probably appeal to Tales fans, a pretty underrated soundtrack from the maestro Noriyuki Iwadare, and fantastic voice acting, and you have a cult classic RPG that might take you by surprise. The best reviewed fighting game of all time, a record that's unlikely to ever be broken because NetherRealm are probably going to make the pause menu a microtransaction in Mortal Kombat one of these days. Soul Calibur should be your go-to game to show off the fun of the Dreamcast to a friend. A sequel to the absolute slapper that was Soul Edge, Soul Calibur is one of those games where it didn't feel like it was just a generational leap, but a lap. Absolutely everything about the first game was taken up by several notches here, with incredible animations that can still surprise you today, so much so that it's often suggested as even better looking than its original arcade version. Soul Calibur also has some of the best range of movement of any fighting game up to 1999, and there's still something to be said for cautiously defending against the Nightmare main who is supposed to be your friend before then kicking them out of the stage. That will never ever get old. So yeah, not much more to say here really. It's 60 FPS fighting game perfection with tons of content and loads of ways to make a nemesis out of your best mate. It's basically what fighting games are about, really. They keep making these games for a good reason, but there was no good reason why we didn't get anything from this next game for years.
Ready, aim. Fire. Fire.
What? Listen, okay, I'm beginning to get a bit offended by these accusations. I'm not just picking games for needle drops. Fine. Developed by less than 25 people, Jet Set Radio is a game that's going to last for many more years than that. What's that? It will actually be 25 years old next year, and everything I know will soon become What's It Dust on the Wind. Cool. Interesting. Ask anyone to give you a game that definitively sums up the Dreamcast as a console, and Jet Set Radio will probably be one of the first picks. Bombastic colours, incredible music, and a Y2K attitude help Jet Set Radio to feel like a monument to a moment in time. It's easy to get caught up in just those lovely cel-shaded visuals when talking about Jet Set Radio, but the hook of grinding and graffitiing your way around while pulling off tricks is still just as good now as it was in 2000, and you just gotta play it if you haven't yet. You just have to. This is another Dreamcast game where prattling on about it really does its refreshingly simple beauty a bit of an injustice, really. I'm holding out hope that the upcoming remake is at least decent, but even if it isn't, we'll still have Bomb Rush Cyberpunk for our fix. Or, you know, the original is still great today. While Dead or Alive as an IP has not aged very well due to just absolutely terrible decisions, those early games are timeless, specifically Dead or Alive 2, which took the pretty good basis of the OG and made itself a showcase for the power of the 6th generation. Visually speaking, you just need to glance at Dead or Alive 2 to realise that it still looks absolutely great today. It arguably has even more vibrant colours than the later PS2 and Xbox ports, with the PS2 version, interestingly, only running at 480i compared to the 480p on the Dreamcast. The movement always looks great, with super fluid, silky ass animations barely seen up to its point of release, arguably surpassing even the benchmark setter that was Soul Calibur 2. And yes, some characters being jigglier than a mountain of jelly getting shot with a Gatling gun when they're just like breathing is a bit funny to see, but just generally speaking, the designs for characters like Ayane, Kasumi, and hottest of all, bass are still iconic. The gameplay too is still great, as Dead or Alive has always pretty much been intended as a series that's incredibly easy to pick up and just start beating up your mates with. I don't think it's overly concerned with metas and slide cancelling or whatever, it's just being really cool and doing really cool martial arts stuff, and there's still a place for it in the current fighting game scene in my opinion. Here's hoping it gets resurrected. Confession time, the first time I played Rez, it was actually on PlayStation 2. I remember it well because I got it from a random video game shop that was on a pier like next to an amusement arcade. That's strange. Where's the weirdest place you ever bought a game? Let me know down below. Anyway, as an impressionable young Digimon stan, let me tell you that playing Rez in all its weird glory was like some kind of video game puberty, and then I played Metal Gear Solid 2 and was suddenly like this. The simplest way to describe Rez is Panzer Dragoon meets Tron, with you controlling a hacker's avatar as they dive deep into an AI system. A rail shooter, Rez has you shooting at targets part of a security system to the beat of the banger electro soundtrack, with the level being shaped around you and your avatar changing form based on your power level. Designed by Tetsuya Mitsuguchi to be as emotive as possible, the wireframe graphics give Rez an entirely unique identity that you can't really properly replicate or get tired of looking at. The gameplay can certainly be challenging and maybe a tad overwhelming, but anyone can pick up the basic gist pretty quickly and get something out of it. Rez is a real treat for the senses, though maybe a bit too much if you're super young and have not yet become a man, i.e. traded your first crazy bone, especially when you're getting into the existentialist singularity stuff. The only thing that hasn't aged too well about it is its short length, but Rez is one of those games that everyone needs to experience in their life at least once. It's a great escape from reality. I've got another confession to make. I did actually originally have another fighting game in this spot, though I decided to instead be a bit more varied. Games like Power Stone and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, which I did already shout out in the PS1 Games That Age Beautifully vid, would be locks here, but let's give the shine to a guy who's really not had a lot of it lately. Rayman. First released on N64, Rayman 2 The Great Escape's Dreamcast version gave players a pretty good idea of the kind of generational leap the console was capable of. Everything was just so much better. Animations, textures, sound, and the N64 version was pretty awesome already. Rayman 2 also just plays great as one of the best 3D platformers of the time, or all time really. You play as the titular cartilageless Wonder as he collects 6 million looms, fights pirates, and regains his powers across varied, vivid, and massive levels with surprisingly tight controls that just make it all feel so smooth to pick up and play today. Speaking of smooth, the game's Dreamcast version is the only console version of the game that runs at a pretty much buttery 60 frames per second, which is kinda crazy for a 3D game with a lot going on from around this time. Even the PlayStation 2 version doesn't hit 60, and it just doesn't feel anywhere near as fluid as a result. Games like Rayman 2 prove that while the Dreamcast may not have been as powerful on paper as its rivals in the 6th generation, it was a bit of a developer's dream, with so many cross-platform games shining when given the chance. And while the dream may not have been a long one, it was a pretty good one. SSX Tricky is a sort of whipper where you don't have to be a fan of the sport in question to enjoy yourself. Maybe if Shaun White looked more like this peak of masculine energy, I would care about snowboarding. The game being an absolute joy to control is something you'll still notice today when picking it up, and pulling off huge ridiculous tricks is always just a joy. The game's look and music might be a bit of a time capsule for 2001, but that's really what makes it a blast today. It's extra as hell, and we love that for it. The characters are fun and memorable, and it also somehow made ginger afros cool. SSX Tricky is as much fun to play now as it was when the game came out over nearly a quarter of a century ago. Don't worry guys, I hated putting that information out there as much as I hated receiving it. Christ. And hey, both SSX Free and on tour also hold up pretty well too, if you're looking to spice up your SSX life even more. While Auto Modelista wasn't going to replace Gran Turismo in serious racing fans' hearts, we're still talking about an extremely enjoyable racing sim with cel-shaded visual flair, some of the most beautiful and difficult tracks to be found anywhere, and enough customization potential to keep you busy for a very long time. Upgrades and a plethora of secrets increase your playtime, and while it obviously isn't as deep as like a Forza Motorsport, there's more here than you might expect. However, what really takes us aback with Auto Modelista is its graphical punch. The gameplay is just fine, but it's the fact that this game is well over 20 years old and looks as though it came out just a couple of generations ago that really damn impresses. Hell, if a AA publisher released this on Steam today, I'll be slamming that buy button so damn hard. This is a bright pop art racing simulation, and we wish Capcom had made just a couple more. A couple more of this next game was definitely made though. Coming bundled with a demo of Final Fantasy XII, but don't hold that against it, it's a little surprising to realise Dragon Quest VIII was released nearly 4 years after Final Fantasy X came out. Coming out a little later in the lifespan of the PlayStation 2 benefited the 8th entry in Japan's iconic Dragon Quest series significantly, as Dragon Quest VIII is even more expansive than Final Fantasy X. The game also obviously still hits visually thanks to new character designs by the late great Akira Toriyama. Rest in peace, King. Basically known as the Dragon Quest that most people associate with the IP one way or another, Dragon Quest VIII was notable for offering players a continuous world, a massive landscape that seamlessly connects you to the towns and kingdoms that make up your adventure. It's a traditional JRPG in its gameplay and other areas, but it's also one of the most beautiful, deep JRPGs to come out on the PS2 storied run. And hey, if you want to see where this lands on our best RPGs on the PlayStation 2 list, be sure to watch, it's like reading and watch at the same time, watch our best PS2 RPGs video, yeah! The first Kingdom Hearts game was a critical success and huge bestseller, combining Disney and Square Enix properties with original characters. Kingdom Hearts as a franchise features one of the most complex stories ever conceived for video games, with various spin-offs adding to the story of Sora and his gang of merry doofuses, but only if you have a variety of different consoles, including the Game Boy Advance and 3DS. It could get a little bit messy, really. However, thankfully Kingdom Hearts 2 is relatively straightforward, with only one game released between this sequel and the first entry. Speaking personally, I never delved into the spin-offs and still knew my Riku from my Roxas, I think. One of them was in Final Fantasy X, right? Anyway, Sora's back along with Goofy, Donald and the others. The sequel has an incredible array of Disney and Square Enix characters, integrating them pretty seamlessly with a sprawling action RPG that still plays quite beautifully. The game holds up exceptionally well after nearly 2 decades, but you can quite easily get your hands on it on modern platforms if you need some more pixels though, and that applies to this next game too. Who's there? They don't get much more controversial than Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty and what happened with protagonist Solid Snake. Probably one of the earliest pop culture internet controversies, right alongside people being mad that the Phantom Menace was bad, people were not happy on the Snake switcheroo that happened here. Me, personally, this was the first game in the series I played, so I was just along for the insane ride. Time has been very kind to this espionage classic though, with many people now seeing it as a prescient, important piece of gaming history. Metal Gear Solid 2 looks and plays just fine in the current gaming landscape, especially if you play it in the Master Collection. Where it really feels timeless though, albeit unfortunately, is in its story and themes of artificial intelligence and vast political conspiracy in an ever dangerous new chapter of the information age. MGS2 was pretty heady stuff in 2001, and it still is now. Do not mail your fish in and play this game if you haven't already. This is my favourite game of all time for a very good reason, and I play it at least twice a year. It is the absolute opposite of
a dud.
Silent Hill 2 might be the more famous sequel at this point, with a hopefully doesn't completely the bed remake slated for release this year. However, Silent Hill 3 is an overwhelming force of story, atmosphere and character that makes it just a little more timeless in our eyes. It's another deeply disturbing chapter in the series for sure, but Silent Hill 3 stands on its own as one of the most brutal and compelling survival horror games of all time. Players control a young girl named Heather who finds herself in Silent Hill without any clear idea of why. That's for you to find out, and across some brain-scratching puzzles and visceral combat, you're going to get some pretty grim answers. Also, giant bunnies. Nothing about what worked so well for Silent Hill 3 has changed between its 2003 release and the present. If the Wind Waker is timeless for its cel-shaded whimsy, Silent Hill 3 is the opposite side of the coin. It is a gritty, grimy, technical marvel with animations that still hold up remarkably well even today. If you like the big rabbit, how about a raccoon? Sly 2 Band of Thieves is the sort of pitch-perfect PS2 experience that, while beloved by almost certainly millions of people, still doesn't quite feel properly respected. Not only are the graphics, music and even the voice acting still an absolute pleasure, but the stealth-focused gameplay is still some of the most enjoyable to be found on any current or past console generation. Just saying it's a stealth platformer really doesn't do it justice though, as this game flip-flops between genres more than Nier Automata sometimes. Seriously, this follow-up in the adventures of Thief and Raccoon, Sly Cooper, is really good, and it's really bad that Sony hasn't made anything new with this IP for like a decade. Improving upon the first Sly game in every possible way, Band of Thieves is a colourful, endlessly amusing platformer. It hits all of the notes you're expecting from a game like this, but is also far more ambitious and all round just daring than many people give it credit for. And hey, the original game and prequel still hold up really damn well too. Make another one, Sony, go on, do another one, Sucker Punch, you got some time. What are you doing at the minute? It's Ghost of Tsushima 2? Sly Raccoon, mate. God of War 2 is a textbook definition of how to make the perfect sequel, one which we would argue is superior to the absolutely awesome original in every conceivable way really. Picking up after the events of the first game, God of War 2 once again has players as the brutal, powerful Kratos. As the new God of War, you've got vengeance on your mind, which means hammering square and triangle until the cramp sets in. The PS2 had a lot of truly bonkers, massively ambitious games towards the end of its life. Games like San Andreas that really had no right to work on turn of the millennium tech when you think about it, but this 2007 banger had you fighting giants, decapitating gods and shagging at a cinematic scale simply never seen before, and it all still lands pretty well today. God of War 2 has steep difficulty, addictive gameplay and puzzles that never veer you all the way into complete insanity. It's also still one of the best looking games the console ever got, just like the game to close off this video. Okami has been released in a variety of formats and on several different consoles and has seemingly never been able to be a huge success sadly, but the 2006 PS2 original is still an absolute wonder to behold. Just like God of War 2, the PS2 being able to handle this expansive, ambitious game that honestly could have been a PS3 launch title is still a bit of a shocker, showing just how versatile and even almost future-proof the system was. Okami is still one of the most compelling games of its time, and it still packs a pretty damn big punch today. Okami tasks you with defeating a host of monsters, restoring colour to the feudal Japan landscape, and bringing the natural order of life back to its proper and essential balance with your miracle paintbrush. If that's enough to pull you in, we promise that Okami is going to keep you playing for a long time. Seriously, a long time. No, Seriously, it's like 30 hours long. Okami is available on modern platforms, but there's something dreamy and beautiful about playing it on original hardware that really is timeless, and it's one of the most beautifully aged PS2 games of all time. I'm always going to take advantage of the opportunity to talk about the Soul Calibur games, so when our pal Steven left the following comment on our PS2 games that aged beautifully video, we just knew that we had to follow through. Soul Calibur 3 was and still is a stunner, a technical marvel for the machine. In fairness, a large majority of Namco's PS2 games of that time boasted some of the most incredible graphics on the platform, whether we're talking about the previous Soul Calibur game, the amazing Tekken games, or Urban Reign, our beloved. Namco just managed to find the ways to push the PS2 to the brinks of its capabilities, but the PS2 work might have peaked with Soul Calibur 3. From detailed and intricate character models to the luscious backgrounds and awe-inspiring weapons, everything about Soul Calibur 3's graphics screams some of the best of the entire console, nay, the generation. I'll always take up the chance to say a nay, by the way. I'm like a verbal horse. Even the soundtrack is just as beautiful as the graphics, as the tracks like Forsaken Sanctuary go extremely hard. Yeah, we could gush more about the graphics, and probably would in other videos if given the opportunity. Best PS2 games about dudes with giant demon swords coming soon, ? But ageless graphics are only part of the story. Soul Calibur 3's gameplay is still massively fun to play, just as it was nearly 20 years ago, while modes like Creator Fighter or the Chronicles of the Sword campaign, which added an RTS-like twist to the scrapping, proved that Namco were willing to experiment and innovate with what was already proven to be a winning formula. Yeah, great pick, Steven. Anyone who's anyone that owned a PS2 will have crossed paths with a Jak and Daxter game at some point. I mean, I just remember the first time I got my PS2 and Jak and Daxter 1 was with it, and then I just had to take a moment to myself there and just get goosebumps. Is that sad? Anyway, it was between Jak and Daxter or Ratchet & Clank about which was the best debut series on the PS2, and while R&C is still getting games, Donnie Joyce clearly has their favourite, stating on our video that Jak def deserves a spot here. Yeah, no arguments there really, as the first Jak and Daxter games stand among the best platformers on the entire console, or of all time. Let's give it its flowers. Introducing players to the titular duo, the game follows Jak after his mate Daxter has been turned into a weird otter-like creature, before the pair are whisked away to try and save the world from evil sages who plan on unleashing a substance known as Dark Eco, which corrupts anything it touches. Naturally, of course, the pair accomplish this by collecting everything in sight. Yeah, it's a collectathon platformer, but that's not a dirty word, and it's, among the best to ever do it, which is not really surprising considering Naughty Dog developed Jak and Daxter off the back of killing it with Crash Bandicoot. Often cited as the first 3D game to offer no visible loading screens, as players are able to traverse from the opening level all the way to the final boss without breaking away from gameplay or cutscenes, Jak and Daxter's improvements on the 3D platforming formula marked the PS2 as a real generational leap from previous consoles. It also helped that the game looked incredible for the time, with great character models and impeccable use of colour to make the world feel more vibrant. Throw in the wisecracking Daxter as one of the better comic relief characters in gaming, and it's no wonder that people still love Jak and Daxter over 20 years later. I hated that information. 20 years ago. Well, while we wait for a new Jak game, which is totally going to happen, right guys? At least the full trilogy plus Jak X Combat Racing are available on PS4 and PS5. Even The Lost Frontier is available now if you fancy it, though that original trilogy does cast a mighty long shadow. Team Ico might have had a short-lived run as a developer, but the mark they've left on the gaming industry can't be denied. Ico and The Last Guardian have become regarded as cult classics in their own right over the years, but for the absolute best of what Team Ico have had to offer, Raigo EQ, my favourite Pokemon, probably says it best. For me, Shadow of the Colossus looks beautiful to this day. Without a doubt, one of the most harrowing and haunting tales ever told on the PS2, Shadow of the Colossus is a game that sticks with everyone that ever played it. Now, we're willing to admit here that this game's remake for the PS4 might colour some opinion on whether or not the game holds up, but speaking purely about the PS2 release, Shadow of the Colossus felt like an incredible swan song for the PS2 as a console, raising the benchmark even further in the last proper days of a console that had just kept doing that again and again and again. Sure, the gameplay might be a tad repetitive in that all you really do is ride horses, climb monsters and stab glowing weak spots 16 times in a row, but the world, the tone and the staggering scale of the Colossi were unforgettable. Serving as somewhat of a prequel to Ico, Shadow of the Colossus follows a young warrior by the name of Wanda, who's travelled to a long abandoned area of the realm in the hopes of reviving the maiden Mono. Once there, he realises that the only way to achieve his goal is to slay the 16 Colossi that have been left to roam the landscape. But with each giant that's taken down, the toll it's taking on the lad becomes more and more visible. It's a tragic tale, but it's executed flawlessly, with the minimalist storytelling allowing the game to be told more through emotions instead of your main character telling you over and over again what you have to do. Shut up, Aloy, please. Shadow of the Colossus is probably not the most original pick in terms of PS2 games that aged well, but we dare anyone to disagree with it. Also, for anyone to say that Goku can absolutely dog walk Superman. Ask someone to think of a game based on an anime or manga and the odds are good that they'll reply with something that has Dragon Ball in the name. Granted, not every Dragon Ball game has been a winner over the years, but there have been some incredible ones that have cemented their place among anime greats, with Anime Bros AMV thinking one DBZ game has aged better than them all. For me, DBZ Budokai Tenkaichi 3 is something I can see myself playing today. Could you see us putting Tenkaichi 3 in this video? Because we have done that. Save your Dragon Balls for wishing for a new F-Zero game, please. Bandai and Spike Chunsoft already found a great deal of success with the Dragon Ball Z Budokai games, which felt like the first proper attempt at replicating the frenetic fights of the anime without taking 2 whole scenes to charge a spirit bomb. Or like two episodes. All the 3 mainline Budokai games were depicted like more traditional fighting games though, with a side-on camera, but Budokai Tenkaichi changed up the formula even further, taking on a behind-the-character camera and allowing players to really explore the environments they were fighting in. Budokai nailed the fierceness and general combat, but Budokai Tenkaichi's improvements gave the DBZ games that sense of scale they'd perhaps been lacking. While all 3 games are incredibly enjoyable romps that either retell moments from the show and tie in movies, where the Broly Bros at, or pose some bonkers what-if scenarios, DBZ Budokai Tenkaichi 3 is the most expansive experience of the bunch on PlayStation 2. BT3 featured nearly 100 unique characters with 161 various forms, while including new features like Battle Replay, more character-specific combo attacks, blast combos, and the Z-Burst Dash, giving players more offensive and defensive options in a fight. Throw in those beautiful cel-shaded graphics and you got a timeless rendition of a timeless anime. If EA weren't absolutely massive cowards and wimps, they'd get Criterion away from Need for Speed, Battlefield, or whatever else they're in the content mines toiling away on these days. Blink twice if you need help, Criterion. While we've typically hyped up either Burnout 3 or Burnout Paradise in the past, J-Pick Santos has wisely reminded us of the middle Burnout game in that golden trio. I remember those days smoking weed, filling my belly with diet soda and playing Burnout Revenge for the PS2. Looks like rubber isn't the only thing that's burning. Am I right, lads? 490, smoke it! The 4th entry in the Burnout series, Burnout Revenge had the unenviable job of trying to follow what is essentially the perfect arcade racing game in Burnout 3 Takedown, which is a tough task at the best of times. How do you capture lightning in a bottle twice? Well, Burnout Revenge decided to try and add new innovations to both the racing and the crash mode to keep the series fresh, with some of those ideas still being incredibly fun to this day. On the racing side of things, Burnout Revenge introduced an incredible mechanic known as traffic checking, which basically allowed you to pinball smaller cars into your opponents or to simply clear out the road in front of you. Of course, checking had its limits, but bouncing cars up and down the road never got old. Meanwhile, the crash mode introduced a launch bar, along with more open-ended junctions, requiring more strategy and skill from the player as opposed to just full sending it at full speed and hoping for the best. Throw in a pretty underrated soundtrack to boot, which instantly gets 15 extra points for having LCD sound system on it, and Burnout Revenge deserves every bit of the love that its counterparts get as well. Xenophobes, look away now. Sometimes games age well by virtue of what comes afterwards. In the case of Monolith Soft's Xenosaga, the more recent success of the Xenoblade games has led a lot of people to look more fondly at their PS2 work, though it seems like Lone Wolf Audio never stopped loving Xenosaga. For me, it's the Xenosaga trilogy. There's never been such a cinematic treat as the first one. The third, while not as cinematic, was even better. The second had a great story. While Mr. Lone Wolf Audio isn't exactly selling us on the second game in the Xenosaga trilogy, all three definitely represent some of the more underrated and underappreciated RPGs on the entire console. Admittedly, Xenosaga is quite the complicated series to explain, with the whole franchise set in a sci-fi universe thousands of years in the future. Earth has been lost, and all the different factions of humanity are basically locked in a struggle over the Zohar, not the Zohan, but don't mess with him, an artifact that allows the wielder to control almost godlike energies. That might sound simple, because war never changes after all, but we're barely scratching the surface of what Xenosaga has going on. If you want complex PS2 RPGs, you are pretty well covered between this and Dot Hack, honestly. As for the gameplay itself, Xenosaga is a turn-based RPG where players gather a party of characters to try and save the universe in either on-foot battles or in mechs. The gameplay would change as the trilogy progressed, with the second game adding multiple levels of attack types that would allow players to more efficiently exploit enemy weaknesses, while the third game would improve the mech playing experience even further by adding dedicated dungeons. While it seems like Monolith Soft would be more than willing to return to the world of Xenosaga if someone was able to foot the bill, the original Xenosaga trilogy stands among some of Monolith Soft's best ever work. Given how much they've been killing it with the Xenoblade Chronicles series, that's saying something. But Luke Skywalker doesn't remember saying anything in this next game. The old Mexler might have had the most left field pick of the bunch in this entire video. I'm playing Yakuza in 1080i and it looks great, he says. We're not ones to look a gift horse in the mouth, or whatever this means. Does anyone know what that means? Have you ever seen a gift horse? Let me know down below. As yapping about Yakuza is one of our many talents, where would you even get a gift horse from? Would it be like, would you get pets at home? But we even have to admit that the original Yakuza is a bold choice for a game that holds up. Would they be expensive? Or is it just like a horse, like in gift wrapping, with a mouth that's open? Questions. Just too many of them. The game that introduces us all to a legendary protagonist, the first Yakuza follows Kazuma Kiryu as he spends 10 years in a jail taking the fall for a murder committed by his best mate, Nishikiyama. Once he's out, throw in a mystery child, Haruka, who's been hunted by the Tojo, along with a curious case of 10 billion missing yen, and Kiryu stumbled into a bit of a conundrum. Alright, so yeah, the fixed camera angles are a bit weird while you're exploring Kamurocho, and the loading screens between fights add quite a lot of age to Yakuza, but there's also the bizarre quality of listening to Mark Hamill voice Goro Majima, a role he's completely forgotten about. However, we reckon that Mex Drago might be onto something, because a retrospective of the original Yakuza game would reveal that the series is basically the same now as it always has been. You're still running around Kamurocho, you're still beating up goons looking to test their luck against Kiryu, and you're still able to sack it all off and go knock a few balls around in the batting cages. The core Yakuza, or Like a Dragon, lad as it's known now, experience is all present and accounted for here, and considering that the series is more popular now than it's ever been, it's hard to argue with the idea that the game that started it all has aged pretty well. Was the Kiwami remake a necessary improvement on the original game? Yes, but that doesn't mean that the values, ideas and overall story shown in the original Yakuza haven't aged well, because they have. like a nice Peugeot or a Ford Focus or like a Nissan Skyline maybe. Between Burnout Revenge, Auto Modelista from our previous video, and Adam Lack's suggestion, racing games on the PS2 really deserve all the flowers they get. Gran Turismo 3 is probably the prettiest game. I know it's not photorealistic by any means, but it looks so damn good. Amazing lighting, beautiful effects. And yeah, can't argue with Adam there, as Gran Turismo 3 was among the first games to release on the PS2 and was considered a bit of a statement piece on what the console would be capable of. The answer was amazing things. Polyphony Digital were firing on all cylinders when it came to making Gran Turismo 3, and while the third entry in the series only offered about a quarter of the amount of cars that were featured in the previous game, the huge improvements made to the game's graphics, sound design, opponent AI, background environments, car physics, and handling, along with the overall presentation, made Gran Turismo 3 an instant winner. Being the best-selling PS2 exclusive isn't an accolade to sniff at, after all. We would be remiss though to not also mention Gran Turismo 4 though, which improves on the gameplay, graphics and career mode in a lot of meaningful ways. Polyphony knew they'd absolutely cooked on that game's graphics, considering they started letting players take controls of their cars in sets from around the world. I mean, there's no point taking a photo if it's not going to look good. Meanwhile, the much beloved career mode in GT4 basically has you as a car and racing enthusiast who is travelling to the various dealers and races to compete and complete your car collection. Both games are excellent examples of the simulation racing genre, and while Gran Turismo is still going pretty strong today, it isn't quite running as strong as it was in those heady PS2 days. We'll always champion these bangers though. I feel like the Champions of Norath fan club meets in our YouTube comments sometimes, as we've received a few comments from viewers referencing the game. Leozar69 and Spirit of Bagheera were the game's, what's the word I'm looking for? Title holders in the comments of our PS2 Games That Aged Beautifully video, but they're far from the only ones, and they won't be the last either. At a base level, Champions of Norath and its sequel, Champions Return to Arms, follow the RPG guidebook right down to the letter. You play as a powerful character, you murder a bunch of monsters, bandits and other creatures in order to earn gold and XP, leveling up and unlocking new skills and gear in the process. However, it's what Champions was built on that makes it such a compelling title, as the game was built using the engine from Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance. Developers Snowblind were determined to improve on the formula though, adding 4-player cooperative online play as one of the game's main features. Champions of Norath felt like a bold new frontier for consoles. Graphically, Champions was pretty impressive too, with excellent character models and backgrounds despite the top-down perspective. The sequel, Return to Arms, offered more of the same fun gameplay and online play, only with the added caveat that players can serve the forces of evil instead, which is always nice to have as an option. Considering EverQuest, which is the game that Champions of Norath is based on, is still going strong as we crawl into 2025, it would be nice to see some revisit these games at some point in the future. Same as this next franchise, but really, we ain't holding our breath. Wind Badger is clearly a person or mustelid of few words, leaving us with the suggestion of Onimusha before disappearing into the shadows like some stripy ninja. Considering their name, along with how quickly they came and left, we're including Onimusha just because we're afraid of some wind-powered, speedy-ass badger flying at us while trying to claw out our eyeballs. Those things can be vicious. You know, and windy apparently. There's an alternate world out there where Onimusha garnered as much success as other Capcom franchises like Resident Evil or Monster Hunter, and we would rather live there. Onimusha's blend of RE-esque dread mixed with some genuinely fun swordplay and combat made the first Onimusha game a unique experience when it first launched on the PS2 back in 2001. Of course, Onimusha's legacy is always going to be solidified, as it was Hideki Kamiya utilising a bug during Onimusha's development that caused Juggle Combos to become the basis for the development of the first Devil May Cry game, but Onimusha still deserves to stand on its own 2 feet. Set in feudal Japan, the game follows Samanosuke of the Akechi clan as he travels to Inabayama Castle in pursuit of his cousin, Princess Yuki. Apparently, monsters have been spotted near the castle, and sure enough, Samanosuke finds himself battling demons known as the Genmar in an effort to rescue Yuki. The game spawned 2 proper sequels, along with a 4th game following a brand new character, and all of these games stand among the best action games available on the PS2. We're quite partial to both the 2nd and 3rd games, but we do have a weirdly soft spot for Onimusha 3. Stick Leon the Professional in anything and you've got our attention.
Awaiting your orders.
We were going to open this entry up by saying something to the effect of being a Star Wars fan hasn't aged too well, but somehow we returned that idea to the pile. Anyway, the Star Wars franchise might have some of the biggest peaks and valleys when it comes to the quality of its tie-ins and spin-offs. Some are great, some are terrible, but we're pretty confident in saying that Star Wars Rogue Squadron 2 Rogue Leader is among the greatest Star Wars games ever made. It's the first game I ever played on GameCube, and wow, did it feel like my PS2 was in trouble when I played it, because, whoa, seeing this? Whoa. Following on from the success of the original Rogue Squadron on the Nintendo 64, Rogue Leader once again follows both Luke Skywalker and Wedge Antilles as they wage war against the Empire. The campaign mode features many of the iconic battles from the films, including both Death Stars and the Battle of Hoth. However, Rogue Leader also throws in new missions and content in iconic locations such as Yavin 4 and Cloud City. As an aerial combat title, Rogue Leader manages to compete with the action and intensity you'd expect from a game like Ace Combat, only with the added bonus that you're piloting X-Wings instead of regular old boring fighter jets. Even if you're not a Star Wars fan, which probably depends on whatever 5 shows they churn out on Disney Plus next week, Rogue Leader is an incredible GameCube experience and it looks gorgeous today. But you can't talk about gorgeous games on the GameCube without talking about this next game. I don't know about this cell shading, guys, it might not catch on. Nintendo, spurred on by your Tears from the Water Temple, clearly decided to make a Zelda game based entirely on water just to spite everyone, and also to make it look exactly nothing like most people had imagined. The result was The Wind Waker, arguably one of the best games ever made for the Nintendo GameCube and of all time, and a genuine example of a game that's aged like a fine wine. From graphics alone, which saw Nintendo deviate into a cel-shaded art style complete with cartoonishly proportioned characters, Wind Waker's aesthetic has managed to enjoy an almost timeless quality. Honestly, it probably held up far better than the more realistic vision people were hoping for. An indie game could launch tomorrow with the exact art style and people would consider it Game of the Year material, and it would honestly deserve it. However, Wind Waker's gameplay also deserves and needs plenty of praise. Sure, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom might have taken the franchise in a successful new, kind of sociopathic direction, but for those who love the classic dungeons, combat and puzzle solving of the older 3D Zelda games, it's on full display here in Wind Waker. If that's not enough praise for you, Wind Waker also manages to be one of the best sailing games ever made, beating out more modern titles like Skull and Bones quite easily because it's not Skull and Bones. Sailing the open seas in Wind Waker gives the most calm vibes gaming has to offer 99% of the time. That other 1% of the time is when you manage to find those bloody whirlpools though. Capcom put out some of the best work of their entire lifespan with the original Resident Evil 4, and while the various ports and new editions of the game have spruced some things up, the core game in general on the GameCube is still wonderful. We're glad Shinji Mikami didn't lop his head off, by the way, we wouldn't have had God Hand otherwise. Sure. So having to plant your feet in order to shoot some infected Spanish villager in the kneecap feels a bit archaic by today's standards, but Resident Evil 4's approach to action and gunplay, which forces you to face enemies head on and commit to attacks, allowed the game to keep some of that horror tension the series was known for. You know, in between Leon roundhouse kicking chainsaw wielding loons while some kind of dolphin woman shrieks at him like Baby Mario in a skirt.
Women.
Ashley make like the second and third letters in your name and shh. While the remake might have adapted Leon's European adventures for modern consoles and nerfed Ashley's ballistics, i.e. her voice, that original trip on the GameCube is still as compelling and enjoyable today as it was back in the mid-2000s, or in its natural habitat, the Zeebo. Hey there Derek, it's him Derek. Now here's a series that hasn't been seen with a brand new game since the early 2000s, and I won't shut up about it, it's a core part of my personality. Reset the counter. Look, we could talk about how F-Zero GX's 3D graphics stand among the best of the era, despite the fact that the game boasts 30 vehicles bombing it around an anti-gravity racetrack at over 1,000 kilometers per hour. Per hour? What a hoot. The variety in the levels, from classics like Mute City and Big Blue to absolutely stunning landscapes like Firefield, Port Town and Lightning, offer some incredible visuals that still hold up today. The sheer chaos doesn't stop the game from running at a smooth 60 frames per second, helping to ensure that F-Zero GX stands toe-to-toe with even the best anti-gravity racers released these days. Yes, that includes Mario Kart 8. And Deluxe, of course, if you want more proof that the ideas of F-Zero GX have aged beautifully. If I was to finally get my wish and receive an F-Zero GX port for modern Nintendo systems, some might find issue with the game's extreme difficulty. While the physics and handling take a lot of getting used to in the first place, ensuring that players need to practice before they can become a true F-Zero champion, the game's AI and expectations of the player are unrelenting, especially during the story mode. F-Zero GX is blisteringly hard, but over time people have welcomed games that are uncompromising in their design and difficulty. We're not going to say that F-Zero GX is the Dark Souls of anti-gravity racing games, because that wouldn't convey how hard F-Zero truly is. Miyazaki lies awake at night in fear of playing F-Zero GX's story mode on very hard. Also of missing out on this sick t-shirt from vaultshirts.com. Don't be Miyazaki now. From one brutally hard game to another, Beautiful Joe perhaps launched a bit too early. Now that it's become a bit more mainstream to desire a challenging video game again, Beautiful Joe could have found a much bigger audience. We're not saying that it would have done, considering how niche the game's genre is or how weird the overall story, characters and aesthetic are, but there's perhaps the possibility that Beautiful Joe would have had a bigger platform to succeed from. Despite that though, Beautiful Joe's loving homage to movie culture and 2D beat-em-ups have ensured that the gameplay is just as incredible now as it was back in the early 2000s. You know, if you can get past the roadblock that is the very first boss fight. Anyway, who knew helicopters could be so tough? They're like the driver parking lots of the sky, or something. Like Wind Waker earlier in this list though, is the graphics of Beautiful Joe that have really stood the test of time the most, as the cel shading gives the game an almost anime/manga-esque quality. It's also a beautiful tribute to the world of cinema, specifically the Sentai and Kaiju genres, with Joe himself fighting giant monsters using massive transforming laser guns and egregious close-ups of his feet to pay homage to Quentin Tarantino. Maybe not that last one. Perhaps that's why it wasn't more successful. The ability to manipulate the film too by slowing time, hitting fast forward or zooming in for your close-up help keep the action fresh, as you solve puzzles and batter goons across the game's various levels. Capcom are deep in their remakes era at the minute, so if we can convince them that Beautiful Joe is still a real beauty, maybe we will get another one. Maybe? Question time! Which Capcom 5 game never came out? Drop your answer below and you could win a free Steam key for free. Nintendo took a huge swing by not releasing the Nintendo GameCube with a dedicated Mario release. Super Mario Sunshine might have been on the way soon enough, but new Mario games are events unto themselves. Instead, Nintendo opted to take a risk by having Mario's brother Luigi take the spotlight in his first proper solo game. The result, Luigi's Mansion, has arguably aged infinitely better than Super Mario Sunshine has, and I'm not just saying that because the latter sometimes makes me want to waterboard myself in frustration as much as I love it. It's definitely a huge part of the reason, but there's much more to it than that. Graphically, the original Luigi's Mansion does a lot with so little, nailing the spooky tone and aesthetic without delving into full horror. That's what the GameCube remake of Resident Evil 1 was for. The combat approaches of the game, which essentially translates to Ghostbusters with a vacuum cleaner, remains a unique yet totally Nintendo way to do fights with the supernatural, and something that's still incredibly fun today. However, the real quality of Luigi's Mansion that's aged the best is how it's elevated the stock of Mario's green loving brother. Before Mansion, Luigi was going to be a forever sidekick, but now Luigi is a genuine protagonist in his own right, like the Jey Uso of the Mario Bros universe, and given equal billing in the Mario and Luigi RPG series. We probably wouldn't have had the year of Luigi without the success of Luigi's Mansion, and also obviously not Luigi's Mansion 3, the greatest game of all time. Okay, maybe it's not having Captain Falcon in it is a minus point, unlike this next game. This one's so obvious I nearly left it off, to be honest, because it's Melee. The original Super Smash Bros. On the N64 felt like gaming's first steps into the world of massive collaborations, with some of Nintendo's biggest hitters gathering together for a massive scrap. Sure, fighting games were crossing over with each other, or in the case of Capcom, teaming with Marvel, but Smash almost opened the door for all kinds of games to start mixing it up with each other. Cut to now with Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, which includes characters and icons from all corners of gaming, while games like Fortnite gather IP like a British school kid gathering conkers on the last week of the summer holidays. Is that too much of a specific reference? Do kids even do conkers anymore, or do they just drown their enemies in Prime? Anyway, Melee's improvements over the core formula outlined in the first Smash game have made Melee one of the most successful fighting games of all time. Name another game that has people lugging CRT monitors and GameCubes across the world just to ensure that the highest level of players can compete for everyone to watch.
Oh, nice. Oh, wow, that was...
Melee is far from the only fighting game over 20 years old with a dedicated competitive following, but the fact that Melee has managed to succeed, or in spite of Nintendo trying to suppress the community at every turn, has to be commended. Was I rapping for a minute there? It sounded kind of like I was rapping. Anyway, if you had to pick one game to sum up the Nintendo GameCube, would it be Melee? Let us know down below. Ever since we first crawled out of the water with our weird little fish legs, humans have longed for the ability to roll balls around levels that become steadily more complicated as you progress. First there were games like Marble Madness in the arcades in the 1980s, but if you fast forward quite a few years, Sega released their almost spiritual successor in Super Monkey Ball. Like Marble Madness, SMB started life as an arcade game before being ported to the Nintendo GameCube, where it quickly became notorious as being both incredibly addictive and punishingly difficult. In truth, all of that comes down to the game's genuine simplicity, as all you're doing is tilting a stage to roll a ball around. Because it's so simple though, on the surface, you delude yourself into thinking you can actually complete the ludicrously precise levels you're thrown into, only to fall off again and again and again. Because Super Monkey Ball isn't a complex game, Sega and Amusement Vision, who also developed F-Zero GX, were able to really put a lot of work into the lighting, textures and background, making Super Monkey Ball one of the most graphically impressive games on the entire platform. Given some of the heavy hitters that the GameCube boasted, that's a pretty high bar to clear. However, the real reason that the original Super Monkey Ball has aged well has to do with the series itself, as games like SMB Banana Blitz try to reinvent the formula by adding features like a jump button and boss fights, tainting the core mechanics as a whole. We'd say that Sega learned their lesson after releasing Banana Mania as a flat remake of the first two games, but then Sega had to add some weird online multiplayer mode to the latest game, Banana Rumble. All you needed to do was just give the party games online play, that's all. Also, all your most annoying friend needs for this next game is Nightmare. You're getting called out again, you know who you are. do you top the greatest reviewed fighting game of all time? Well, throw in the Hero of Time as a playable character, apparently. Not including the Dreamcast or Melee, Soul Calibur 2 is arguably the best fighting game of the entire 6th generation. Again, the Dreamcast doesn't count you. You can't compete with that fighting game library, sheesh. Technically the third game in the series if we're counting Soul Blade, which we are, because it rules. Soul Calibur 2 took the franchise to new heights with improved graphics, faster gameplay, and bigger single-player modes. Weapon Master mode was miles ahead of its time, honestly. What's helped Soul Calibur 2 to age extremely well though, aside from how good the graphics were and are, is how much Namco embraced guest characters. Each version of SC2 across PS2, Xbox and GameCube were blessed with their own guest character, and while Xbox and PS2 had decent guests, they weren't quite up to the GameCube's level. I mean, the PS2's Heihachi appearance is just Namco lifting a Tekken character and plonking him in with a bunch of swords, while the OG Xbox's Spawn appearance came about because Namco were already working with creator Todd McFarlane to put his original creation, Necrid, into the game. Quite how Namco managed to get Nintendo to agree on Link's appearance for the GameCube is anyone's guess, but Link mixing up with Nightmare and the gang has become a genuinely wonderful memory for most GameCube owners. And hey, the game is still just really, really fun. Right, okay, so has Go-Go Hypergrind aged well because of its gameplay? Not really, though. This obscure curio's approach to skateboarding feels like a weird and kind of brilliant cross between Looney Tunes and Jackass. The game sees a bunch of original cartoon weirdos all competing for a shot at glory by steering via skateboard into a variety of cartoon blunders, comboing as many of them together as possible to score points. Imagine Sideshow Bob was an anthropomorphic wolf and he hit a McTwist in between every step on a rake and you're about there. Admittedly, the gameplay is kind of ropey and weird and also a bit great, and if you want a better skateboarding game, the GameCube offers plenty of Tony Hawk titles to choose from. At least Hypergrind doesn't have Eric Sparrow in it though. In Eric Sparrow. What makes Go-Go Hypergrind a game that's aged incredibly well for the GameCube is all to do with the cel-shaded graphics and overall aesthetic. Despite using the same kind of technique that other games mentioned so far have also used, Hypergrind still manages to stand out from the crowd, and a lot of that is because the developers Atlus worked with Spumco, the creators of Ren and Stimpy, in order to create the game's roster of characters. They look like parodies of Looney Tunes characters, and that's completely intentional, but it gives the game an almost timeless quality. Add on to the fact that, again, this was developed by Atlus before they became a proper gaming powerhouse with the release of Persona 3 and 4, and you've got a game that offers a rare glimpse into what else Atlus are capable of. Remaster or even just port it then, gang, yeah, just so we don't have to pay these absurd second-hand prices. Completely unrelated question for you all. If you're reviewing science, right, do you rate pi or pi rate? Something to think about. One of the nicest surprises of the last decade, apart from the re-examination and realization that yeah, Lost was actually good the whole time, has been the absolutely crazy outpouring of love for Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance, Platinum's character action spin on Metal Gear that Hideo Kojima was a supervising director for. I wonder which parts he supervised, you dirty dog. While nobody could ever say that Metal Gear Rising was a failure at release in 2013, with it selling a healthy 2 million copies, its departure from the style of usual Metal Gear was a bit divisive among fans who hate having fun, and it didn't seem to stick in the mind of that many in its release year with the PS4 on the horizon. Since 2022 though, when you could hardly look at Twitter without seeing Jetstream Sam somewhere, appreciation for Raiden's Big Day Out, in which the milkman goes to hunt down more milk from some private military contractors, has exploded. From From continuing the franchise's eerie ability to see into the future, to the incredible soundtrack, to just how good the game feels to play without any unnecessary fat, Metal Gear Rising really has aged beautifully. Personally speaking, this is just me, I will be taking a Rising replay over Guns of the Patriots any day. Obviously, its PlayStation 3 version isn't the best way to play it these days, but for targeting 60 FPS and often hitting 40 to 50 on the PS3, it's one of the smoother games to play on the console in 2024, and did you know that if you play it, we will get a second game?
My source is that I made it the fuck up.
Question: who is this? Comment your answer down below and you could win a free Steam key. Not every PlayStation launch game stands the test of time, though, in my opinion, Killzone Shadowfall on PS4 probably would not look out of place on PS5 today. The same could maybe be said for Ridge Racer 7, which came out competing against big hitters like Resistance, Genji, and, Tony Hawk's Project 8. More like Project Shite, but while all of those certainly show a bit of rust, Ridge Racer 7 still looks and feels the part today, and that's because way back in the halcyon days of 2006, some 44 years ago, Bandai's Racer managed to not only be 1080p, but also 60 frames per second. Considering how challenging it is to get 4K 60 FPS these days, you can imagine how difficult it must have been all those years ago to manage something equivalent, especially when the PlayStation 3 was notorious for not always playing ball for developers. It's also just a wonderfully straightforward racer to revisit in an era of overcooking things, as it were. Get car, drive car, unlock more car, drive that car, and repeat while vibing out to some Y2K adjacent music and checking out the horizon. Lovely stuff. Yes, visually, Ridge Racer 7 isn't the most complicated game by today's standards, but if you just want pure racing fun on your PlayStation 3, you could do much worse. Sadly, while Ridge Racer used to be the game to launch your new console with, Ridge Racer 7 remains the last proper Ridge Racer game released for consoles, if you discredit Ridge Racer Unbounded, and yes, we will be doing that.
And the boy's first challenge was to extricate himself from the booby trap he'd just set off.
While you could perhaps fairly argue that Sony really just don't get out of their comfort zone enough when it comes to the PlayStation 5, you could hardly say the same for their work on the PlayStation 3. They weren't afraid to get a bit weird, is what we're saying, to publish games they knew wouldn't make all the money but would be creatively interesting. That certainly applies to Puppeteer, one of the console's most unsung gems that still looks and plays beautifully today. Following Kutaro, a boy who's been transformed into a puppet, you play as the least problematic video game character holding a giant pair of scissors as he looks to cut his way through this constantly shifting side-scroller while taking on a very cranky bear and his equally cranky minions. If that doesn't sound quite weird enough for you, how about that you've been decapitated and are able to find different heads to fill in the blank, as it were. Oh, and those heads can come flying off too, leaving you scrabbling to pick it back up. You've heard of Never Dead, now it's time for Never Head. And this game is actually unironically good too. From the puppet show setting, to the storybook aesthetic, to the mechanics adopted by bangers like Snipperclips, to even the ability to play it in co-op, Puppeteer is a game that has hardly aged a day on your PlayStation 3. Sony's decision to shut down Japan's studio, though, that looks like more of a head-ass decision by the day. So you made a whole level within Astrobot about Ape Escape, so how are you now going to capitalize on that for Ape Escape? If you say a Detroit Become Human remaster, I may actually scream. Some games change your life. Everyone remembers where they were when they heard Song 2 in FIFA 98 for the first time, for instance. However, there are some games that fundamentally shape you as a person if you let them, and Journey is certainly an experience that is hard to forget, even all these years on. About as lo-fi as video games get, Journey's objective is simple: bring yourself that horizon. You play as an unnamed, scarfed adventurer who's on a pilgrimage to reach the top of a mountain. You can jump and make a few chirps, and that's about it. It's no Skyrim, though it would be interesting to see a game in which you can shout your way up a mountain. Get on that. Bennett foddy. But there's real beauty in the basics of Journey. Developed by the minds behind the equally great Flower, Journey's stunning vistas and goosebump-inducing soundtrack is probably the best argument for video games as art there is. Even if you're used to slide cancelling and pop shove-iting or whatever it is these kids are doing these days, it's hard to imagine that you won't be moved by Journey in some way, and I really don't want to say too much more than that. I'm not embarrassed to say that I personally really needed to experience Journey when I did. If you're not where you want to be right now, maybe you do too? We're not treading any new ground here when we say that Ubisoft has seriously mistreated Rayman over the years, turning him into the Poochie of his own series alongside the Rabbids before then making him your average Valorant player. He just needs to be in some blockchain game to really cap it all off. They actually did do that. Cool! What makes all of this so much worse is how brilliant his two most recent full-fat games, Legends and Origins, actually were and still are, with the duology probably being in the top 3 of most Rayman fans. The problem for Ubisoft? Apparently they weren't very strong sellers, but they were profitable. Just not profitable enough at a time when the Rabbids could be part of a minigame collection about hiding a dead body and still rake in the money. Of the two, Origins came first and follows Rayman as he looks to restore the Glade of Dreams and Bubble Dreamer after the evil doings of an evildoer from the land of the living dead. Legends, meanwhile, is set a century after Origins and follows Rayman and the gang, the Ray Gang, I don't know, fixing more of Bubble Dreamer's mess. Both games are pretty similar to each other, with players taking on gorgeous side-scroller levels with tons to collect, plenty of different characters to play as, and Legends even featuring remastered levels from Origins for like 120 levels in total, which is a lot of levels. What makes both Rayman games resist the ravages of time so well though is that both can pretty reliably run at 60 FPS and 1080p, which is a real rarity. It feels brilliant today, but not as brilliant as it will when Ubisoft eventually does anything actually good with this IP. Please don't make him a Rainbow Six Siege operator next. Okay, actually do that for a laugh because I'd like to see that, and then give him a new game right after. There are a lot of games that overcomplicate things. Even the sequel/reboot to this game, Catalyst, added fluff that nobody was really asking for, and it was overlooked by a lot of people to the point where it's one of the de facto "oh yeah" games, as in "oh yeah, that came out." It's not a bad game though, but there's a good chance that anyone you talk to has some fond memories of the relatively pure Mirror's Edge, a parkour game that asked, what if Assassin's Creed was first person, but instead of chilling in bushes and trying not to fall asleep while tailing targets, you're always pushing forward? In it, you play as Faith Connors, a much more nimble courier than Sam Bridges, though unfortunately with none of those handy pocket ladders to rely on, as she looks to clear up her sister's name after she's been accused of murder. What that means for you is a lot of leaping or running and taking in the deceptively squeaky clean image of your dystopian city. The key word for Mirror's Edge is momentum, as it's a game in which you really have to jump at the exact right time and rarely let your pace slip. Once you get into the flow of it, there's few games that feel as good as Mirror's Edge, though make no mistake, you're going to be fixing a lot of your mistakes over and over again before you get to that point. Yeah, there is some combat here, but if you liked Dying Light but wish there was a lot less of those pesky zombies and that someone put the lamp on now and again, Mirror's Edge is a bright, eye-catching delight on your PlayStation 3, even in 2024. If you like the look of Mirror's Edge but wish there was a bit more orphan in it, let us introduce you to Batman Arkham City. Alright, granted, we're not going to be the first people ever to show you one of the most revered and beloved games of all time, but what Rocksteady did here is honestly like magic and should be celebrated. First off, this is an effects-drenched, action-heavy open-world game on the PlayStation 3 that regularly manages to stick to 30 FPS, even as Batman bashes heads together and uses his orphan makers, i.e. his big billionaire bruisers. In an era where intense action would often mean some pretty severe frame dips, Arkham City looking and playing this good in 2011 was wild. And man, it seriously does look crazy good. In an era of Batman games where the character of the game itself comes second to the skins, it's hard not to immediately see how well Arkham City has aged. Yes, the streets may be fairly empty, but glide around in the snow while the city positively hums with neon and moody lighting and try not to be impressed well over a decade on. It's a game you can just sit in and feel pulsating with life. No wonder the marketing guys were proud of it, as they put every single word anyone has ever said about the game on a subsequent edition's box art. That's probably the only thing about this masterpiece that's aged poorly though. It shouldn't be a surprise to see a game with animation produced by Studio Ghibli on a list of games that have aged well. I recently watched Spirited Away for the first time, I know, but in my defense I am an uncultured swine and that could quite honestly have been released today. The same applies to Ni no Kuni Wrath of the White Witch 2, which many people forget is a souped-up version of a Nintendo DS game that never left Japan. Hey, do you want to see a video on PlayStation 3 games that never left Japan? Let us know in the comments down below. Ni no Kuni follows Oliver, a young boy whose whole world is flipped upside down when his mother dies after she saves him from drowning. In the most effective bit of crying since Ash somehow became de-thawed, Oliver's tears manifest Trippy, a Welsh fairy who almost immediately sends him to another world. You sadly don't go to Pontypridd, but instead a world controlled by an evil wizard. So basically, Rill. The game story goes in some pretty traditionally wild JRPG directions, but Ni no Kuni is a pretty refreshingly straightforward time as far as the actual role-playing goes, with a nice blend of turn-based and action combat, as your familiars help you out in battle and also tell you exactly what to do pretty much all the time. But it's the presentation where Ni no Kuni absolutely soars. From those gorgeous cel-shaded visuals to the amazing soundtrack to the charming humour, Wrath of the White Witch will regularly have you just cheesing. Be sure to check out the constantly overlooked Revenant Kingdom afterwards, which introduces a bit of Dark Cloud into the mix, also developed by Level 5. Without wanting to repeat myself from the Puppeteer entry a bit too much, there really have been way too many creative casualties since Sony's first party focus switched to over-the-shoulder and costing $300 million to produce. Sly Cooper, also known as the much more literal Sly Raccoon in Europe, is another one that's been consigned to the black bin bag in the sky. It's a real pity, as it looked like they were building quite the Slyverse for a second there, but the IP has been more or less left in the past since 2013 and the release of Thieves in Time. The game probably didn't get anywhere near hitting sales targets as Sony cancelled already completed DLC for the game. Ouch. That's just a shame, as while it might not have quite the same magic as those first 3 games, Thieves of Time was a real tonic for those looking for an old school platformer collectathon when it launched back in 2013. 36 years ago. Okay, I'll sort that out. The first game not developed by Sucker Punch, the honourable lot you may also know from the equally forgotten, infamous, and also Ghost of Tsushima. New developers Sanzaru took their work from the Sly collection and built probably the most ambitious title to date. Sly and the gang must rescue his ancestors so that he stops getting McFly'd, hopping from one star to the next while mainly focusing on staying out of sight. It's Thieves in Time's variety that really makes it such a joy to play, as you will be hopping around from one experience to the next, collecting new moves as you go while falling in love with this gang of idiots. If you're after a cel-shaded platformer with tons of content, funny jokes, and absolutely not getting any resolution on cliffhangers at a crispy 60 frames per second, you shouldn't waste any more time before giving this a spin. So you might have heard that old thing, that old chestnut, where it's like objects in rearview mirror are closer than they appear, which is not only basic road safety to stop Final Destination 2 situations, but can also be applied more metaphorically to say that your memories may not be as accurate as you think. In terms of video games, it should probably be previous games in series are better than new games in series, mirror, because the absolute stink of Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite has really highlighted just how good Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 truly was and still is. Objectively speaking, from top to bottom, Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 is a tag fighter that's going to last the distance way better than Infinite, with a far deeper well of characters, a much less upsetting aesthetic thanks to its lovely cel-shaded visuals, and a simple fun factor that's sorely missing from Infinite. What's interesting here is that the base Marvel vs. Capcom 3 itself probably has not aged that well at all due to how broken it was in terms of balancing, but this Ultimate update may have just made it the ultimate 3D MVC game, with more style characters and better online play. Not to mention balance, though you can still absolutely cheese the shit out of it. The fact that Infinite never even had the chance at a redemption arc says a lot, really. Obviously, you're going to want to play a competitive fighting game on a more current system like the PS4, but if you're looking to see just how badly Frank West can body Ghost Rider at 60 frames per second without being a bit sick in your mouth, Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 is absolute nonsense that we will always have time for. So, you're telling me that technology can be kind of bad sometimes? What the hell? Oh! You're still here? That's weird. Yeah, well, yeah, thanks for staying around. Nothing else to do, eh? For 4 hours, nearly? Did you fancy Return of the King? The extended is really good. I like the bit where Sam just tongues his wife. So yeah, if you did actually, and I mean actually, you didn't just skip to the end, right? If you skip to the end, I'm calling policemen. If you skip to the end, this doesn't apply to you. But if you watched this all the way through, it doesn't matter if you watched it one go or loads of little chunks, comment I made it down below in the comments and you'll get a free Steam key because you're a good egg. I've been Jimmy for Cultured Vultures. It's been good to have you, and thanks for everything. Could just be normal.